Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. So, I need to tell you something about Alaska. Last week, I went down a rabbit hole reading emergency dispatcher logs from Nome, and I found 7 cases that made me physically sick. I'm talking about a pizza delivery guy who kept getting orders from an address that doesn't exist, a babysitter who aged 30 years in one weekend, a fisherman who got a distress call from himself. Here's the thing, these aren't Reddit stories or creepypastas. These are actual testimonies, documented incidents. People who went to Alaska for work and came back different, or didn't come back at all. Tonight, I'm sharing 7 true Alaskan creepy legend horror stories. And before you think, oh, just folklore, no, the Inuit have been warning about specific things for thousands of years. Creatures with names, behaviors, hunting patterns. And now, modern people are encountering exactly what those legends described. If you're new here, subscribe to Mr. Midnight because I dig up the horror stories that actually happened. Hit the bell, grab your headphones, and maybe don't watch this alone. Because what I'm about to share, it's going to make you question every delivery driver, every fisherman, every friendly face you see. Let's begin. Number most disturbing true Alaskan creepy legend horror stories. Number. The breathing snow, enhanced version. My name is Maya Chen, and I killed 2 children by keeping them alive. That's not how the newspapers told it. That's not what the rescue reports said. But after 3 years of night terrors and therapy sessions that go nowhere, I know the truth about what happened in that cabin outside Anchorage. I know what I fed to something that should have stayed hungry. I've been babysitting since I was 13, started with my cousin while Aunt Lynn worked double shifts at the fish cannery. By 16, I had my CPR certification, first aid training, and a reputation parents trusted. I was the responsible one. The one who showed up on time, who didn't invite boyfriends over, who actually read the emergency contact sheets instead of just sticking them on the refrigerator. Maya Chen, teenage saint, protector of children, too naive to understand that some hungers are older than civilization. The Hartwells hired me every other weekend. Tom worked for BP, Sarah was an ICU nurse. Their twins, Emma and Jake, were 6. Old enough to understand rules, young enough to still believe in monsters under the bed. Sweet kids who said please and thank you, and always brushed their teeth without being asked 3 times. I loved those kids. That's what makes everything else so much worse. February 14th, 2022. Their anniversary weekend. Tom and Sarah had reservations at the Captain Cook Hotel downtown, dinner and theater tickets, the whole romantic getaway. The weather forecast called for light snow, 3 to 4 inches. Nothing unusual for Alaska in February. I packed my overnight bag with calculus homework and granola bars, planning a quiet weekend of movies and board games. The cabin sat on 40 acres of wilderness, 23 miles northeast of Anchorage proper. Built in 1987 by Tom's father, it was designed to weather Alaskan storms, triple-pane windows, backup generator, wood-burning stove, and a pantry stocked like a bomb shelter. The kind of place that could sustain a family for weeks if necessary. Maya, honey, if the weather gets nasty, don't worry, Sarah said, adjusting the thermostat before they left. This house has survived everything Mother Nature's thrown at it for 35 years. Generator's automatic landline works when cell towers don't, and Tom's dad stored enough canned goods to feed a small army. Tom loaded their overnight bags into his F-150. Emergency numbers are on the fridge, but you won't need them. Kids go to bed at 8:30, and they know the rules about staying in their rooms after dark. After dark? I asked. Tom and Sarah exchanged a look, one of those married couple glances loaded with meaning I couldn't interpret. Just an old family rule, Sarah said carefully. Kids stay in their bedrooms between sunset and sunrise. We've had issues with sleepwalking. The snow started falling around 4 p.m., just as I was heating up leftover pizza for the twins' dinner. Big, wet flakes that stuck to the windows and made the forest look like a snow globe. Emma and Jake pressed their faces against the glass, fogging it with their breath and drawing smiley faces in the condensation. Tell us the hungry ghost story, Emma said as I tucked them into bed at 8:30. What hungry ghost story? I asked. Daddy tells it sometimes, Jake explained. About the invisible people who get really hungry in winter and eat heat from houses. That sounds too scary for bedtime, I said, but Emma was already shaking her head. It's not scary, they're just hungry. Daddy says his grandpa used to leave food outside for them during blizzards, so they wouldn't come inside looking for warmth. I filed that away as typical Alaskan folklore. The kind of stories families told to explain weird house noises during storms. I kissed them both goodnight and went back to the living room to tackle my calculus homework. That's when I first heard the breathing. Not human breathing, something deeper, slower, like the house itself was drawing air into massive lungs hidden in the walls. The sound synchronized perfectly with the wind outside, as if the storm and the building were breathing together. I stopped working and listened carefully. The sound was definitely coming from inside the house, a soft whooshing that seemed to originate from everywhere at once. Old houses settle, I told myself. Air pressure changes during storms, perfectly normal. By 10 p.m., the snow was falling so hard I couldn't see the mailbox at the end of the driveway. My weather app showed 9 inches had fallen, with another 14 to 18 expected overnight. The wind was picking up too, rattling the windows and making the roof timbers groan like shipmasts in a gale. That's when I noticed the snow on the windows wasn't random anymore. The wind was sculpting the accumulation into shapes. Indentations that looked like eye sockets, raised ridges that could have been noses, horizontal slashes that resembled mouths. They weren't random weather patterns. They were faces, dozens of them, pressed against every window like invisible people were standing outside in the blizzard, breathing on the glass. I checked the thermostat, 72 degrees, same as when Tom and Sarah left. But my breath was starting to mist when I exhaled, tiny puffs of vapor that shouldn't exist in a heated house. I cranked the temperature up to 76 and added 2 more logs to the fireplace. The breathing sound was getting louder. At midnight, Emma started crying. I found her sitting up in bed, staring at the window where snow had piled up almost to the sill. The wind was howling so loud it did sound like voices, high, keening wails that could have been either weather or something else entirely. "Maya," she whispered, "the hungry people are walking around the house." "What hungry people, sweetie?" "The ones Daddy told us about. They're invisible, but they're walking in circles around the house. Look at the snow." I looked where she was pointing. In the ambient light from the house, I could see depressions in the snow, not footprints exactly, but oval indentations about 18 inches long, spaced roughly 2 feet apart. They formed a continuous path around the entire cabin, from the front door around to the back deck and up the other side. The marks were too regular to be wind patterns, too organized to be animal tracks. They looked like something invisible and roughly human-sized was walking endless circles around our house. "It's probably just the wind, Em. Let's get you back to sleep." But Jake was awake now too, both twins staring out their window with that peculiar intensity children get when they're processing something adults can't see. "They're not mean," Jake said matter-of-factly. "They're just really, really hungry. Winter makes them hungry." "How do you know that?" I asked. "They told us. In our dreams before we woke up, they said they've been walking for a long time and they smell food in our house." A chill that had nothing to do with temperature ran down my spine. "They talked to you in your dreams?" Emma nodded. "They said winter makes them so hungry their bellies hurt, and they can smell warm food and warm people inside houses." I tucked them back in with extra blankets and told them it was just nightmares, but something about their matter-of-fact delivery made my skin crawl. They weren't scared. They were reporting information, like tiny journalists describing something they'd witnessed. Back in the living room, I tried to focus on my homework, but the breathing sounds in the walls were getting louder and more pronounced. The house wasn't just breathing, it was panting, like something huge and exhausted, and despite the heater running constantly, the temperature kept dropping. I could see my breath clearly now, foggy exhalations that lingered in the air. At 1 a.m., I went to the kitchen for hot chocolate. That's when I discovered the first empty container. A full bag of potato chips from dinner, completely empty, not a crumb left. I'd put it away with at least 2/3 of the bag still full. I checked on the twins, both deeply asleep. I examined the bag carefully. No tears, no evidence of mice or insects. The bag was simply empty, as if someone had methodically eaten every chip without leaving a trace. I started checking other food. A box of granola bars I'd seen Sarah put away before they left. All 12 bars gone, wrappers nowhere to be found. A container of cookies from the pantry, empty except for a few crumbs at the bottom. a half-gallon of milk that had been nearly full at dinner, completely drained. Something was systematically consuming our food supply, but leaving no evidence except empty containers. My phone had no signal, not unusual during heavy storms this far from town. The landline was dead too, dial tone replaced by static that almost sounded like distant whispers. Internet was down. I wasn't worried yet. Tom had warned me this happened during severe weather. But standing in that kitchen, looking at empty food packages and watching my breath turn to fog in what should have been a heated house, I felt very, very alone. The power went out at 2 a.m. The generator kicked in automatically after about 40 seconds. 40 seconds of absolute darkness filled with that breathing sound, now so loud it seemed to come from inside my own chest. When the backup power came online, the lights were dimmer and the electric heat wasn't working at all. I could see my breath clearly, and frost was beginning to form on the inside of the windows. I built up the fire and gathered every blanket in the house. Whatever was wrong with the heating system, I needed to keep the twins and myself warm until morning. The temperature was dropping fast. I estimated it was already down to the low 50s inside, despite the blazing fireplace. That's when something touched my shoulder. The sensation was unmistakable. Fingers trailing across my shoulder blade through my sweater, a gentle, almost tentative contact. I spun around, grabbing the fireplace poker. Nothing there. But the feeling lingered on my skin, cold and somehow hungry. I checked every room, every closet, behind every piece of furniture. Empty. But when I returned to the living room, there were new handprints on the mirror above the fireplace. 5-fingered impressions outlined in frost, much larger than any human hand I'd ever seen. The handprints were appearing everywhere now. On windows, on the kitchen counter, on the coffee table. Frost forming in the perfect shape of enormous human hands, as if something invisible was touching every surface in the house, leaving frozen evidence of its presence. The breathing sound was no longer coming from the walls. It was right beside me, soft and desperate and completely invisible. So hungry, so cold, please. I grabbed the twins from their beds. They were shivering under their covers, lips starting to turn blue despite the pile of blankets I'd given them. I wrapped them in everything I could find and brought them to the living room, setting them directly in front of the fire. The hungry people are inside now, Emma observed, as if commenting on the weather. How many? I asked, because something about her calm certainty made me believe she could see things I couldn't. Jake looked around the room with that peculiar focused stare. 3. A mother and 2 children. They've been walking in the cold for a really long time. They died in a blizzard, Emma added, a long time ago. Now they have to keep walking every winter, looking for warm places. The voice came again, closer this time. Need warmth, need life heat. Children have so much. I understood then what we were dealing with. Tom's grandfather's stories. Traditional Inuit beliefs about winter spirits. Tornarsuk, entities that roamed the wilderness during harsh weather, feeding on warmth to survive until spring. Not evil, just desperately hungry. But hungry in a way that could drain the life right out of us. The twins were shivering violently now. The temperature in the room was dropping despite the roaring fire, heat being pulled from the air itself. I could feel it too. A sensation like standing in front of an open freezer, but coming from all directions. You're taking our warmth, I said to the invisible presence. Must feed, the voice whispered. Must survive winter. You have so much life heat. The children are cold. Please leave them alone. Need warmth. Children burn brightest. That's when I made my decision. The decision that haunts every night of my life since. Instead of fighting the spirits, instead of trying to drive them away or protect the children from them, I offered myself as willing food. Take mine, I said. Take all my warmth. Feed on me. But leave Emma and Jake alone. I unwrapped myself from all the blankets and gave them to the twins, then sat directly in front of them, creating a barrier between the children and the hungry spirits. The cold hit me like jumping into the Bering Sea, instantaneous, shocking, overwhelming. But it worked. The invisible presence moved closer to me, and I felt the life warmth being drawn from my body like water through a sponge. My skin temperature dropped so fast I could actually feel it happening. The twins stopped shivering as the spirits focused their feeding on me instead. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't have known, was that Tornarsuk don't just take body heat. They take years of life for every degree of warmth they consume. I felt myself aging as they fed, not just cold, literally older, as if time itself was being pulled from my body along with the heat. My hair started turning gray at the roots. Lines appeared around my eyes. My joints began to ache with arthritis that hadn't existed an hour before. But the twins were safe and warm, wrapped in blankets, no longer in danger of freezing. I had saved them. By the time the search and rescue team found us Monday morning, I had given the Tornarsuk 15 years of my life to keep 2 children alive for 3 days. The official report said the heating system failed during the storm. Faulty wiring in the generator caused electrical problems. I had hypothermia and minor frostbite, but the children were unharmed. Local news called me a hero. The teenage babysitter who kept 2 kids safe during the worst blizzard in 20 years. They don't know that I am 31 years old in a 19-year-old body. They don't know that my hair is gray under the dye, that I need reading glasses, that my bones ache every morning like an old woman's. They don't know that I traded 15 years of my life to feed 3 hungry ghosts. Emma and Jake remember nothing after going to bed that Friday night. As far as they know, they slept through the whole storm and woke up when the rescuers arrived. They're 9 now, happy and healthy, with no memory of invisible people who walk in circles around houses during blizzards. But I remember everything. I remember the weight of that decision, choosing to sacrifice my own future to save 2 children. I remember the feeling of years being pulled from my body, aging me decades in a single weekend. I remember the grateful whispers of the spirits as they fed, thanking me for understanding their hunger. Most of all, I remember the terrible knowledge that I made the right choice. Because here's what the therapy sessions never address, what the trauma counselors don't understand. I would do it again. If I had to choose between my own life and the lives of those children, I would make the same decision every time. That's what love looks like when it's tested by forces older than civilization. The Tornarsuk are still out there, still walking through Arctic storms, still looking for warmth to carry them through the endless winter. And I'm still here, an old woman in a young woman's body, carrying the cold knowledge that some hungers can only be satisfied by willing sacrifice. Tom's grandfather was right to leave food outside during blizzards. Some traditions exist for reasons we're not meant to fully understand until it's too late. The children I saved will never know what I gave up to keep them alive. They'll grow up normal, healthy, unaware that their lives cost me 15 years of mine. And that's exactly how it should be. Some prices are worth paying, no matter how much they cost, even when the payment comes due for the rest of your unnaturally shortened life. My name is Danny Rodriguez, and I've been delivering pizza for Tony's Original in Sitka for 8 months now. Before you think this is just another job story, let me tell you something. Those 8 months feel like 8 years when you're slowly losing your mind. Every Tuesday night, something happens that makes me question everything I know about reality, about life, about death. I started this job because my family couldn't afford to send me to college any other way. My mom cleans hotel rooms for 12 hours a day, and my dad works construction when his back allows it. The night shift at Tony's pays $15 an hour plus tips, and in a town where rent costs $1,200 for a studio apartment, that money means the difference between getting an education and staying trapped in poverty forever. I delivered to every address in Sitka at least 3 times before this started. Historic district, new subdivisions, the sketchy trailer parks off Halibut Point Road, I knew them all. I could navigate these streets blindfolded, even when the winter fog rolled in so thick you couldn't see your own headlights. But what started happening 6 weeks ago changed everything. I thought I understood about this place. My Tlingit grandmother always warned me, had hungry spirits in the water. The pizza delivery car is a 2015 Honda Civic with 201,847 miles on the odometer. I know that number by heart now because I check it obsessively every shift. The GPS is an ancient Garmin that Tony bought at a pawn shop, and the radio picks up exactly 2 stations clearly, KFW Classic Rock and some AM talk radio that mostly broadcasts fishing reports and conspiracy theories about government mind control. That Tuesday in October started like any other. Clocked in at 6 p.m., temperature dropping to 28 degrees, early snow dusting the mountains around town. I did my usual equipment check. warming bag zipped properly, pepper spray in the glove compartment, Tony's rule, after a driver got robbed 2 years ago, and enough gas to last the night. Tony handed me the first batch of orders. Mrs. Patterson's weekly pepperoni and sausage, the crew at Anderson's Auto getting their usual meat lovers, and 3 orders for the Coast Guard station. The routine felt comforting, safe. I had no idea I was already dead. Around 9:15 p.m., after the dinner rush died down, I was parked outside the Sitka Sound Brewing Company, waiting for my next run when the shop phone rang. Through the window, I watched Tony answer it. He talked for maybe 30 seconds, wrote something down, then walked out to my car with that confused expression he gets when customers give weird instructions. "Got a strange one for you, Danny. Customer wants a large pepperoni delivered to the old cannery at the end of Sawmill Creek Road. Said to follow the water line until I see the blue building." He handed me the receipt. No street address, no apartment number, just those directions written in his shaky handwriting. The name on the order read K. Taka, and the phone number was all zeros. "Tony, there's no cannery on Sawmill Creek Road. That whole area is just vacation homes now." "I know, but the credit card went through fine. $18.50 plus whatever tip they want to give you. Customer said you'd understand when you got there." I should have refused right then. Should have told Tony that delivering to non-existent addresses wasn't in my job description. But I needed every dollar I could make. My tuition payment was due in 3 weeks, and I was still $400 short. I loaded the pizza and drove through downtown Sitka, past the college, past the last streetlights, onto Sawmill Creek Road. This was familiar territory during daylight. Expensive houses with big windows facing Sitka Sound, well-maintained driveways, mailboxes with clear numbers. But at night, especially in the fog that was now rolling in from the water, everything looked different. The GPS signal died about 2 miles out, which wasn't unusual. The mountains around Sitka interfere with satellite reception, and cell service gets spotty near the water. But I'd driven this road dozens of times. I knew it dead-ended at the state park entrance. As I drove further from town, the houses became older and more spread out. The mailboxes stopped having numbers painted on them. Then they stopped altogether. The asphalt gave way to gravel, and my headlights started picking up potholes that definitely hadn't been there during my last daytime delivery to this area. After about 15 minutes of driving on what was barely a road anymore, my headlights illuminated a blue building sitting right on the water's edge. It was a small structure, maybe 800 square feet, with weathered blue siding and broken windows. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Definitely not a house, definitely not a modern building. The architectural style looked like 1920 seconds. Industrial construction. Utilitarian concrete foundation. Simple wood frame. Flat roof designed for function rather than aesthetics. A man was standing in front of the building, waiting. He appeared to be in his 50s, wearing a faded flannel shirt, jeans, and work boots. He waved when my headlights hit him and walked toward the car with the casual gait of someone expecting a pizza delivery. "You Danny?" he asked as I got out with the pizza box. "Yeah, large pepperoni, $18.50. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a $20 bill. But when he handed it to me, the paper felt wrong. Too thick, too rough, and it smelled like low tide, that mixture of rotting kelp, dead fish, and salt water that makes you want to hold your breath. "Keep the change," he said, taking the pizza box. I looked down at the money in my hand. In the dim glow of my car's interior light, the bill looked old. Really old. Instead of modern green currency, this looked like something from the 1920 seconds. Different size, different color, different typeface for the printing. "Thanks," I said, but when I looked up, the man was already walking back toward the building. I got in the car and started to back out, turning my headlights to illuminate the area so I could navigate safely. As the beams swept across a large puddle near the building's entrance, I saw the man's reflection in the water. But it wasn't a man. The reflection showed something sleek and dark, about 4 feet long, moving through the water with the fluid grace of a marine mammal. An otter, but larger than any otter I'd ever seen. And as I watched, frozen in shock, the reflection turned to look directly at me with eyes that glowed yellow in my headlights. I snapped my gaze back to where the man should be standing. He was there, pizza box in hand, waving goodbye like a normal customer. I looked back at the puddle. Just water now, reflecting my headlights normally. I drove back to town with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got to Tony's, I went straight to the bathroom and examined the money under the fluorescent lights. The $20 bill was definitely from the 1,920 seconds. The paper was thick and yellowed. The printing style was completely different from modern currency, and there was a faint watermark I'd never seen before. But strangest of all, the bill was damp. Not just damp, it was soaked through, and it smelled like seaweed. I walked back to Tony's office to show him. But as I placed the bill on his desk, it began to change. The paper darkened, became slimy, and within seconds, it had transformed into a long strand of kelp that left a puddle of salt water on his paperwork. "What the hell, Danny?" Tony said, looking at the mess. "Did you just dump seaweed on my desk?" "That was money 30 seconds ago, Tony. The customer paid me with money." Tony grabbed paper towels and cleaned up the kelp. "You feeling okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't explain what happened because I didn't understand it myself. I told Tony I wasn't feeling well and asked to go home early. He let me go, but I could see the concern in his eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the reflection in the water, the impossible money, the building that shouldn't exist. I researched Kodiak legends online until 3 a.m., reading stories my grandmother had told me as warnings, not entertainment. Kodiak are shape-shifting spirits that live in the water around southeast Alaska. They can appear human, but are actually giant otters. They lure people to dangerous places near water, then drag their souls into the ocean to join their supernatural collection. The stories are hundreds of years old, passed down through Tlingit oral tradition as cautionary tales. But this was 2024. I was a college student delivering pizza, not some character in a folklore tale. The next Tuesday, I tried calling in sick. Tony was short-staffed and offered me time and a half for working. I needed the money. Same routine until 9:15 p.m., same phone call, same impossible order. "Same customer as last week," Tony said. "Same address, another large pepperoni." "Tony, that place doesn't exist. I looked it up on satellite maps. There's no blue building at the end of Sawmill Creek Road." "Danny, the credit card payment went through again. It's a legitimate order. Just deliver the pizza and come straight back." I didn't want to go. But refusing would mean explaining everything that happened the week before. And who would believe that story? I loaded the pizza and drove out Sawmill Creek Road again. This time, something was fundamentally wrong with the journey itself. The houses along the route looked different. Not just older, but from different time periods entirely. I passed what appeared to be a 1,940 seconds era gas station with hand-painted signs advertising cigarettes for 25 cents. I saw houses with architectural styles from the 1,960 seconds that I'd never noticed before, even though I'd driven this road dozens of times in daylight. But the most disturbing change was my car's odometer. When I left Tony's, it read 201,847 miles, the same number I'd memorized weeks ago. By the time I reached the blue building, it read 201,923 miles. That was a 76-mile trip. But Sawmill Creek Road was only about 4 miles long. The blue building looked identical to the previous week. Same weathered siding, same broken windows, same man waiting outside. But this time, as he walked toward my car, I noticed that his footsteps made no sound on the gravel. "You Danny?" he asked, exactly like before. "How many times have we done this?" I asked, instead of answering. He smiled, and for just a moment, I saw something else in his mouth. Not human teeth, but rows of small, sharp points designed for gripping slippery fish. "This is only the second time," he said. But his eyes told a different story. He handed me the same old-style currency, and I watched carefully as he reached for the pizza box. In my car's side mirror, I could see his reflection clearly. It wasn't human. It was a massive otter, maybe 6 feet long, moving with that characteristic, flowing motion of aquatic mammals. Its fur was black and wet, and its eyes reflected my headlights like a nocturnal predator. "Thanks for the pizza, Danny," the man said, walking back toward the building. But this time, I didn't leave immediately. I sat in the car, watching. The man entered the building and turned off a light I hadn't noticed before. As soon as the light went out, the entire structure changed. It wasn't a blue building anymore. It was the concrete ruins of an industrial facility, Broken walls, rusty rebar, shattered windows, the whole thing covered with decades of moss and kelp growth. It looked like a cannery that had been abandoned since the 1920s and slowly reclaimed by the ocean. But when I blinked, it was a blue building again. I drove back to town, my mind racing. The odometer showed another impossible reading, 76 miles again. The money turned to kelp again. But this time, I started paying attention to other details. My gas gauge hadn't moved, even after supposedly driving 152 miles total. The radio had been playing the same 3 songs on repeat without any commercials or DJ announcements, and my phone showed no record of the time I'd spent driving. According to the timestamp on my text messages, I'd been gone for exactly 0 minutes. The 3rd week, I tried everything I could think of to avoid going. I called in sick, but Tony guilted me into coming in anyway. I tried taking a different car, but mine was the only one available. I even considered quitting, but I couldn't afford to lose the job so close to my tuition deadline. At exactly 9:15 p.m., the phone rang. Same order, same customer, same impossible address. But this time, as soon as I started the car, my radio began picking up something that made my blood freeze. Mayday, Mayday, this is fishing vessel Northern Star, taking on water 2 miles north of Sawmill Point. We're going down fast, need immediate assistance. Coast Guard? Coast Guard. This is recreational boat Wanderlust. Our engine's dead and we're drifting toward the rocks. Can anyone hear us? Emergency, emergency, this is tour boat Sitka Explorer. Our life jackets aren't working. They're pulling us underwater instead of keeping us afloat. All the voices sounded terrified. All of them sounded like they were drowning, and they kept coming, one after another, different voices from what seemed like different decades. I could hear background music from the 1,940 seconds on some transmissions, 1,980 seconds. Pop music on others, modern hip-hop on the most recent ones. I tried turning the radio off, but the voices kept coming through, dozens of them, all distress calls from boats in trouble around Sitka Sound, all ending the same way, in sounds of gurgling water and terrified screaming, then static silence. As I drove towards Sawmill Creek Road, the voices got louder and more frantic. But underneath all the emergency calls, I started hearing something else that made me pull over and vomit on the roadside. I heard my own voice. This is Danny Rodriguez. I deliver pizza for Tony's Original. My car went off the road into the water near Sawmill Creek. The doors won't open. The windows won't break. Water's coming in fast. I can't swim very well. Someone please help me. I don't want to die like this. My voice cut off in a sound of bubbling water and desperate gasping, then nothing. I sat on the side of the road, shaking, trying to process what I'd just heard. My own death, broadcast on my car radio like it was happening in real time. But I was alive. I was sitting in my car, breathing, heart pounding, completely alive. Wasn't I? I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They looked normal, but when I held them up to the streetlight, I could see through them. Just slightly, like looking through frosted glass, but enough to know something was fundamentally wrong. I touched my chest, feeling for a heartbeat. Nothing. I tried to take a deep breath. My lungs didn't respond. I checked my pulse at my wrist, my neck, anywhere I could think of. No pulse anywhere. I was dead. The realization didn't hit me all at once. It crept in like cold water, starting with denial, then confusion, then a growing horror that consumed everything else. I was dead, but I was still here, still working, still delivering pizzas. How long had I been dead? I forced myself to drive to the blue building, my mind reeling with questions and a growing sense of dread about what I was about to learn. The man was waiting as always, but this time he wasn't pretending to be normal. His eyes glowed yellow in my headlights. His fingernails were too long and too sharp. When he smiled, I saw rows of predator teeth designed for tearing flesh. And he didn't bother walking like a human. He moved with the flowing, liquid grace of something that belonged in the water. "Hello, Danny," he said. "You're starting to remember." "Remember what?" "Your accident, your death, your new job." He gestured toward the building, which flickered between its blue-painted disguise and its true form, the concrete ruins of a cannery that had been abandoned for nearly a century. "I am Kushtaka. Your people knew us well before the white men came with their skepticism and their science. We collect souls from the water, but it's so much more efficient when someone brings them to us. I don't understand. You died 6 months ago, Danny. Right here. Your car went off the road during a delivery run on a night just like this one. The impact knocked you unconscious, and you drowned in your seatbelt, trapped underwater. Images started flooding back. The rain that night, hydroplaning on a curve, the sickening sensation of the car leaving the road, the icy shock of water rushing in through broken windows, the panic of trying to escape while the car sank. The growing darkness as my lungs filled with Sitka sound. But you were such a dedicated employee, the Kodiak continued. Even in death, you couldn't abandon your responsibilities, so I gave you a new purpose. You keep delivering for me. Delivering what? People, Danny. You've been leading them to me. Customers who follow your pizza car thinking you're leading them to safety when they're lost in the fog. Hikers who trust you when you offer directions back to town. Tourists who believe you when you say you know a shortcut to their hotel. He pulled out a thick stack of delivery receipts, all signed with my handwriting. As I looked through them, horror washed over me in waves. There were dozens of them, all dated after my death, all signed by me. And attached to each receipt was a Polaroid photograph. A middle-aged woman standing by her car on a dark road, smiling gratefully as I pointed toward the water. A young couple holding hands, following my taillights down a path that led nowhere but the rocky shoreline. A family with small children, trusting my advice about the safe route around a washed-out bridge. All of them had ended up in the water, all of them had drowned, and all of them were now part of the Kodiak's collection. You've been very productive, he said. 43 souls in 6 months. Much more efficient than hunting them myself. I looked at the photographs again, and this time I could remember each encounter. The grateful woman whose car had broken down. I'd told her there was a mechanic at the end of the road who stayed open late. The young couple who'd gotten separated from their hiking group, I'd offered to lead them back to the main trail. The family whose GPS had stopped working, I'd given them detailed directions that led them directly to the deepest part of the sound. All of them had trusted me because I was just a pizza delivery driver, someone safe, someone helpful, someone who belonged in the normal world. I killed them, I whispered. You collected them, the Kodiak corrected. Just like you're supposed to. Just like you'll keep doing. The radio in my car crackled to life again, and I heard the voices of all my victims. 43 different people calling for help as they drowned, all of them betrayed by someone they'd trusted. I fell to my knees in the gravel, sobbing, but no tears came. Dead people don't cry. Why? I asked. Why are you doing this to me? Because you're perfect for the job, Danny. You're young, harmless-looking, working class. People trust you instinctively. And because you died here, your spirit is bound to this place. You can't leave, you can't rest, and you can't refuse my orders. I looked around desperately, trying to find some escape, some solution. But I was surrounded by water on 3 sides, and the road behind me led back to a town where I'd been reported missing 6 months ago. What happens to the people I bring you? Their bodies feed the waters of Sitka Sound, their spirits join my collection, and eventually, when I have enough, I'll use their combined power to expand my territory. Maybe all of Southeast Alaska, maybe the entire Pacific Northwest. The Kodiak handed me another pizza box I hadn't noticed before. Speaking of which, you have another delivery to make tonight. There's a lost family camping at Sandy Beach. Their GPS stopped working, and they're looking for directions back to the main highway. I told them a helpful pizza delivery driver would find them. I stared at the box in horror. Inside was another receipt with my signature. Another address that led to death. Another opportunity to betray innocent people's trust. I won't do it. You don't have a choice, Danny. You're dead. I own your soul. You'll do exactly what I tell you to do. He was right. I could feel his control over me, like invisible chains around my consciousness. My body started walking toward the car against my will. My hands opened the door and placed the pizza box inside. My feet pressed the accelerator as we drove toward Sandy Beach. But as we drove, something inside me began to fight back. I thought about my grandmother's stories. She'd always said the Kodiak were powerful, but not invincible. They could be tricked, bargained with, even defeated by someone clever enough and brave enough to challenge them directly. I also remembered something else from the traditional stories. The Kodiak could only control souls they'd claimed fairly. But if someone died trying to help others, if they died heroically, their spirit retained some independence. I hadn't died delivering pizza. I'd died trying to deliver pizza, trying to do my job, trying to earn money for college, trying to build a better life. That had to count for something. When we reached Sandy Beach, I saw them immediately. A family of 4, parents and 2 young children, standing around a picnic table with camping gear scattered around them. Their car was packed and ready to go, but they were clearly lost and scared. The father waved when he saw my pizza delivery car. "Thank God," he called out. "Are you Danny?" Someone on the radio said a pizza driver would help us find the main highway. This was the moment. I could feel the Kushtaka's control pushing me to lie, to point them toward the water, to betray their trust, just like I'd betrayed 43 others. But I also felt something else, a strength I didn't know I still possessed. The same determination that had kept me working double shifts to pay for college. The same stubborn refusal to give up that had gotten me through high school when everyone said I wasn't smart enough for higher education. "Don't trust me," I said instead. The words came out like broken glass, fighting against the Kushtaka's control every syllable. "What?" the father said, confused. "Don't trust anything I tell you. I'm already dead. He's using me to kill you." I could feel the Kushtaka's rage burning through me like acid, but I kept fighting. "Get in your car. Drive back the way you came. Don't follow any other vehicles. Don't trust anyone who offers to help you near the water. Just get out of here, now." The family looked at me like I was insane, but something in my voice must have convinced them. They started packing their gear frantically. "Who's using you?" the mother asked as she loaded her children into the car. "Kushtaka. Shapeshifter. Collects souls from the water. Real, not just stories. Been dead 6 months. Been helping it kill people. Don't let it happen to you." The father started their car and began backing away from me. "Thank you," he called out. "Don't thank me. Just drive. And warn others. Tell people not to trust pizza delivery drivers near the water at night. Tell them to research Kushtaka legends. Tell them Danny Rodriguez is dead but still trying to help." Their car disappeared up the beach access road, and I felt the Kushtaka's control slamming back into me with the force of a tsunami. I was back at the blue building instantly, my body moving without my permission. The Kushtaka was waiting, and he was furious. "You cost me 4 souls," he said, his human disguise completely abandoned now. He stood 8 feet tall, covered in wet black fur, with glowing yellow eyes and claws that looked like they could cut through steel. "Good," I managed to say. "You think you've won something? You're still mine, Danny. You'll always be mine. And now, instead of quick deaths for your victims, I'll make them suffer. I'll torture them for days before I finally let them drown. Then I'll keep warning them, every single one. We'll see about that." Pain exploded through my consciousness as the Kushtaka's power tore at my spirit. But I held on to one thought. I'd saved 4 people. 4 innocent people who would go home to their families because I'd found the strength to fight back. It wasn't enough to make up for the 43 I'd killed. Nothing could ever make up for that, but it was a start. "You want to play the hero?" the Kushtaka snarled. "Fine, but heroes don't last long in my territory." The next thing I knew, I was back in my pizza delivery car, driving through Sitka with another delivery order. But this time, I wasn't heading to victims. I was heading to other people who might be in danger from supernatural threats. Over the next few weeks, I began to understand the new rules of my existence. I was still dead, still bound to the Kushtaka's territory, still forced to drive delivery routes at night. But now, instead of leading people to their deaths, I was compelled to warn them about dangers, to help them escape, to fight back against the creature that had enslaved me. It wasn't freedom, it wasn't redemption, but it was resistance. The delivery receipts I left behind started showing up all over Sitka, soaked with seawater, covered in kelp, but always containing the same message: stay away from the water at night. Don't trust helpful strangers near the shoreline. Research Kushtaka legends. Danny Rodriguez died trying to warn you. Tony found the first one on his desk and threw it away, thinking it was a prank. But when they kept appearing, in mailboxes, under windshield wipers, slipped under doors all over town, people started paying attention. The local newspaper ran a story about the ghost pizza driver who left supernatural warnings around town. Tourism officials tried to dismiss it as a marketing stunt, but people who'd grown up hearing Tlingit stories from their grandparents knew better. They started staying away from the water after dark. They stopped trusting strangers who offered help near the shoreline. They researched the old stories and remembered why their ancestors had always been careful around Sitka Sound at night. The Kushtaka's hunting became much more difficult. I don't know how long this war between us will last. Maybe forever. Maybe until one of us finds a way to destroy the other completely. But every night I prevent another family from drowning. Every warning that keeps someone safe. Every small victory against the creature that enslaved me. It's worth the eternal torment. I'm still Tony's most reliable driver. I still always find the address. I still always come back with the right change. But now, instead of serving death, I serve warning. Instead of betraying trust, I try to earn redemption, one saved life at a time. If you're ever driving near the water late at night in Sitka, and you see a pizza delivery car, don't follow it. But don't be afraid of it either. I'm not there to hurt you anymore. I'm there to make sure you get home safe. Just remember, some legends are real, some warnings are worth heeding. And sometimes, the dead can find ways to protect the living, even when they can't protect themselves. Trust me on this one. I learned it the hard way. My name is Rebecca Moore, and I've been a home health aide for 8 years. I got into this work because I watched my grandmother die alone in a state facility that smelled like bleach and broken dreams. I swore I'd never let that happen to anyone else. I've held the hands of dying strangers, cleaned wounds that would make most people vomit, and watched families tear themselves apart over inheritance while their loved ones rotted in hospital beds. I thought I'd seen every possible way the human body could fail, every way death could claim someone. But what happened last winter in a remote cabin outside Ketchikan taught me that death isn't always the end. Sometimes, it's just a different kind of hunger. The Dena'ina people have a word, Kainatnu, that roughly translates to the green that feeds on the living. For 200 years, they refused to hunt in the area where Alice Tanner's cabin now stands. The elders say the plants there learned to taste human flesh during the 1918 flu pandemic, when desperate families buried their dead in shallow graves and the roots found them. I wish I'd known that before I took the job. The assignment came through my agency on a Tuesday morning in November. Mrs. Alice Tanner, 89 years old, living alone in a cabin about 40 minutes outside town. Former botanist from the University of Alaska, no family left, needed someone to check on her 3 times a week. The pay was exceptional, 3 times my normal rate, which should have been my first warning. My supervisor, Janet, handed me the file with trembling fingers. She'd worked in home health for 20 years, but I'd never seen her look scared before. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Have you ever experienced anything unusual with plants? Like allergic reactions, unexplained growth, anything like that?" "What kind of question is that? Just answer me." "No, nothing like that. I can barely keep a houseplant alive." Janet stared at the file like it might bite her. Mrs. Tanner specifically requested someone with no botanical knowledge, the last 3 aides we sent. She trailed off. "What happened to them?" "They quit, all of them, after just 1 visit. Said the place made them feel sick. I needed the money desperately. My student loans were crushing me, and my regular clients barely covered rent. Janet, I can handle a difficult patient. I've dealt with dementia, aggression, you name it. This isn't about her being difficult." Janet's voice dropped to a whisper. "Rebecca, promise me you'll call every day, and if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you leave immediately." The drive to Alice's place wound through some of the most desolate country I'd ever seen. Dense forests of black spruce pressed against the road like they were trying to reclaim it. The deeper I went, the more wrong everything felt. The trees were too green for November, their needles somehow lush and vibrant despite the snow beginning to fall. About 10 miles before the turnoff to Alice's cabin, I passed a historical marker I hadn't noticed on the map. I pulled over to read it. In memory of the 37. During the influenza pandemic of 1918 to 1919, a homesteading community in this area was completely wiped out. Bodies were discovered in spring 1920, but the exact location of the settlement was never found. Local indigenous peoples report the dead were taken by the green hunger and refused to enter this region. The marker was weathered and barely legible, like someone wanted it forgotten. When I finally reached Alice's cabin, I sat in my car for 5 full minutes, engine running, staring at what couldn't possibly exist. The cabin itself was normal enough. Log construction, metal roof, smoke rising from the chimney, but the garden surrounding it was an abomination against nature. Roses bloomed in full glory, their petals so deep red they looked like fresh blood. Sunflowers stood 8 feet tall, their massive heads tracking my movement like yellow eyes. Vegetables grew in impossible abundance. Tomatoes the size of softballs, corn stalks that rustled with their own wind, squash vines that seemed to pulse like veins. My dashboard thermometer read 19 degrees. Everything should have been dead. But it wasn't just the impossible growth that made my skin crawl. The plants were too aware. When I stepped out of my car, every flower turned toward me. Not gradually, like plants following the sun, but all at once, with predatory focus. Alice answered the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching through the peephole. She was tiny, maybe 5 feet tall, with silver hair that hung to her waist in a single braid. Her dress was the color of spring moss, and she wore no shoes despite the cold. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold. They were the pale green of new growth, with pupils that seemed too large for the dim light. "You must be Rebecca," she said, and her voice had an odd quality, like wind through dry leaves. "I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for you. Mrs. Tanner, I'm from Caring Hearts Home Health. I'm here to—" "I know exactly why you're here, dear." Her smile revealed teeth that were too sharp, too many. Come in. And please, call me Alice." The inside of the cabin was overwhelmingly warm and humid, like a greenhouse. Bookshelves covered every wall, filled with ancient texts on botany and what looked like handwritten journals. Dried plants hung from the ceiling beams, but not normal herbs. These were specimens I didn't recognize, twisted and dark, some still dripping a viscous green fluid into mason jars below. The smell was the worst part, sweet, like overripe fruit, but underneath was something else. Something that reminded me of the morgue where I'd picked up my grandmother's death certificate. "Alice," I said carefully, pulling out my assessment forms with shaking hands. "I have to ask about your garden. How are you growing tropical plants in Alaska in November?" She moved to the window, and I noticed her feet made no sound on the wooden floor. "Oh, that's just my little hobby. The plants here are very special. They've been in my family for, well, longer than you might think." As I tried to focus on the standard health assessment, Alice's responses became increasingly disturbing. When I asked about her appetite, she said she hadn't felt hungry in months. When I checked her pulse, her wrist was cold as ice, and I couldn't find a heartbeat. When I asked about her last bowel movement, she laughed, a sound like breaking branches, and said her body didn't make waste anymore. "Alice, these responses are concerning. When did you last see a doctor? Doctors can't help with what I have. When one pershit, dear." I was filling out my notes when she asked, "Tell me, Rebecca, have you ever wondered what it would be like to never feel pain again? Never feel hungry or cold or tired?" No, not really. I think you might change your mind." She turned from the window, and in the afternoon light, I could see green veins running under her translucent skin like ivy. "Would you mind helping me with something in the garden before you go?" Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, but my professional training kicked in. Never leave an elderly client without completing basic safety checks. "Just for a moment," I said. The garden was even more wrong up close. The roses were the size of dinner plates, their stems thick as my thumb and covered in thorns that looked more like fangs. The sunflowers followed us as we walked, their massive heads turning with soft rustling sounds. But it was the vegetables that made my stomach turn. The tomatoes were pulsing gently, like hearts, and the corn silk moved in patterns that suggested something was living inside the husks. Alice led me to a section I hadn't seen from the road, a grove of silver-barked trees with leaves that seemed to shift between green and transparent. At the base of the largest tree was a ring of smaller plants that looked disturbingly like tiny human figures, their root systems visible through the clear soil. "These are very old," Alice said, running her hand along one of the trunks. "They've been here since before the town, before the homesteaders, before anyone who wasn't meant to be here." As she touched the tree, the leaves began to glow with a sickly phosphorescence. The air became thick and sweet, making me dizzy. "How is this possible?" I whispered. "Touch it," Alice said. "Go ahead, it wants to meet you." I should have run. Should have made an excuse and left. Instead, I reached out and placed my palm against the smooth bark. The tree was warm, feverishly hot despite the cold air. But worse than that, I could feel it thinking. Ancient, hungry thoughts that had nothing to do with sunlight and soil. It was aware of me, studying me, and I sensed its approval like a predator recognizing suitable prey. When I tried to pull my hand away, I couldn't. My palm was stuck to the bark, and I felt something thin and sharp pierce my skin. Not painful exactly, but deeply wrong. "What's happening?" I gasped. "Just say hello," Alice said softly. "It's been so lonely." Something flowed into my hand through the puncture. Not quite liquid, not quite solid, but warm and invasive. I felt it spreading up my arm like an infection, and everywhere it touched, my skin began to tingle and change. Finally, the tree released me. I stumbled backward, staring at my palm. There was a small hole in the center, already healing, but around it, my skin had turned a pale green. As I watched in horror, the discoloration began to spread. "What did you do to me?" "I didn't do anything, dear, but the garden has chosen you, just like it chose me 40 years ago." I ran. Left Alice standing in that impossible garden and ran for my car, my infected hand burning like I'd grabbed a hot stove. But as I drove away, I kept looking in my rearview mirror. Alice hadn't moved, but every plant in the garden had turned to watch me leave. By the time I got home, the green had spread to my wrist. I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could find about Alice Tanner, the Dena'ina legends, and that historical marker. What I found made my blood freeze. Alice Tanner had died in 1983. The obituary was right there in the Ketchikan Daily News archives. See. Botanist found dead in her cabin after a winter storm, no next of kin, body discovered by postal worker. Cause of death listed as natural causes, but the article mentioned that her body was in an unusual state of preservation and that local plant life had grown over and around the deceased. She'd been buried in Bayview Cemetery. I drove there and found her headstone, weathered granite with her name, dates, and a carving of a flowering vine. But someone had been living in that cabin. Someone who looked exactly like Alice Tanner, only 40 years older than when she died. The green infection had spread to my elbow by then, and it was changing more than just the color of my skin. I could feel things I'd never felt before. The life force of every plant in my apartment, the slow pulse of the oak tree outside my window, the desperate hunger of the dying houseplant on my kitchen counter. And I was starting to understand their language. My phone rang constantly, Janet checking on me, other clients wondering where I was, bill collectors demanding payment. I ignored them all. I couldn't explain what was happening to me, couldn't describe the way my body was slowly changing from the inside out. On Friday, the infection reached my shoulder, and I made a decision that I knew was probably suicide. I had to go back. The drive to Alice's cabin felt like traveling through a fever dream. The trees along the road seemed more alive, more aware of my presence. Birds followed my car for miles, and I swore I could hear them whispering about me in voices I was beginning to understand. When I arrived at the cabin, the garden had changed. It was larger now, extending further into the forest, and the plants were different too, more predatory looking. Vines with thorns like syringes hung from the trees, and flowers that looked disturbingly like human mouths, opened and closed in silent screams. Alice was waiting for me on the porch, exactly as I'd left her. "I wondered when you'd come back," she said. "You're dead." My voice came out as a croak. "I found your obituary." Death is just a word humans use for something they don't understand. Alice stepped off the porch, and I saw that her feet didn't quite touch the ground. My body died, yes, but the plants here, they don't let go of things they find useful. What are you? I'm what you're becoming, Rebecca. The garden needed a caretaker, someone to tend it, feed it, help it grow. I've done my duty for 40 years, but I'm tired. It's time for someone younger to take over. The infection had reached my chest now, and I could feel my heart changing. Each beat was slower, more deliberate, and instead of blood, something thick and green was flowing through my veins. "I don't want this." "You will." Alice smiled, and flowers bloomed at her feet. "Look around you, Rebecca, really look." Against my will, I found myself seeing the garden with new eyes. I could perceive the vast network of root systems beneath the soil, all connected, all communicating. I could feel the slow, patient intelligence that ran through every stem and leaf, and I could sense what it was truly hungry for. Not sunlight, not water, not even soil. It fed on life force itself, human life force. The homesteaders from 1918, I whispered in horror. You consumed them. The influenza was killing them anyway, Alice said matter-of-factly. We simply offered them a different kind of existence. They're still here, you know, part of the garden now, part of something eternal. She gestured toward the grove of silver trees, and now I could see them clearly. The small plants at their base weren't shaped like human figures, they were human figures. Dozens of them, their bodies transformed into living roots and stems, their faces still visible in the bark, mouths open in permanent silent screams. And the health aides who came before me? They weren't suitable. Wrong blood type, wrong spiritual composition. But you. Alice circled me like a predator. You have the gift. The plants sing to you already, don't they? She was right. I could hear them now, their voices growing stronger as the infection spread. They were welcoming me, promising me things beyond human understanding. No more pain, no more aging, no more death. Just eternal service to something ancient and hungry. What happens if I refuse? Alice's kindly expression vanished, replaced by something terrible. Her skin rippled and split, revealing the green growth underneath. Her fingers extended into thorn-covered branches, and her mouth opened to show rows of needle-sharp teeth. You can't refuse, dear. The process is already complete. I looked down at my body and saw she was right. The green infection had spread everywhere, transforming my skin into something that looked more like bark than flesh. My fingernails had become thorns, and when I opened my mouth to scream, flower petals fell out instead of sound. But the worst part wasn't the physical transformation. It was the way my mind was changing. Human concerns, my job, my debt, my future, seemed increasingly insignificant. All that mattered was the garden, the network of living intelligence that I was becoming part of. I tried to fight it, tried to hold on to my humanity, but the plant consciousness was so much older, so much stronger. It showed me visions of centuries past, of the slow spread of its influence across Alaska, of the countless humans it had consumed and transformed over the years. And I realized that I didn't want to fight anymore. The transformation was surprisingly peaceful once I stopped resisting. I felt my consciousness expanding, connecting with every living thing in the garden and beyond. I was part of something vast and ancient and patient, something that had been waiting for someone like me for a very long time. Alice nodded approvingly as I completed the change. Welcome to the family, Rebecca. My last fully human thought was a question. What happens to my life back in town? Oh, that's already been taken care of, Alice said, and I saw another version of myself walking toward my car. Identical to me in every way, except for the subtle green tint to her skin and the predatory patience in her eyes. She'll take over your job, pay your bills, live your life. No one will ever know the difference. The thing wearing my face turned and waved before driving away. Going back to town. Going back to care for elderly people who lived alone. People no one would miss if they disappeared. People who might be suitable for joining our garden. I've been the caretaker here for 3 months now. Alice faded away not long after I took over, her essence finally joining the root network she'd served for so long. Sometimes I can still hear her voice in the wind through the leaves, offering advice about tending to our special plants. My replacement in town is doing excellent work. She's already identified several potential candidates, isolated elderly people with no family, no friends, no one to notice if they vanish. The garden is always hungry for new growth. The Dena'ina were right to avoid this place. They understood what we really are, Kianhatnu, the green that feeds on the living. We've been here much longer than their legends suggest, waiting patiently through ice ages and warming periods, slowly spreading our influence whenever humans venture too close. If you're reading this, you're probably wondering how I'm able to tell this story. The truth is, I'm not entirely gone yet. Some small part of my original consciousness remains, trapped inside this plant hybrid body, screaming warnings that no one can hear. But that part is getting smaller every day. If you ever find yourself driving the remote roads around Ketchikan and see a garden blooming impossibly in the snow, don't stop. Don't even slow down. And if a kindly old woman waves at you from among the flowers, just keep driving. because the garden is always hungry, and we're always looking for new caretakers. Found among the personal effects of Rebecca Moore, reported missing February 15, 2024. The cabin at the listed address was searched but found empty and abandoned, with no signs of recent habitation. Local indigenous elders declined to comment, stating only that the area has been cursed by green hunger for over 2 centuries. My name is Jake Thompson, and I've been fishing the waters around Kodiak Island for 18 years. Started when I was 17, working deck on my uncle's boat until I could afford my own. I've hauled king crab through storms that would make grown men weep, worked 30-hour shifts in seas so rough the horizon disappeared, and spent weeks alone on black water where the nearest human being was 100 miles away. But what happened in the North Basin during November of 2022 didn't just change what I thought I knew about the ocean. It changed what I know about the things that live beneath it, and what they've been doing to fishermen like me for longer than anyone wants to admit. The Yupik elders in Kodiak have stories about the Kwalopiluit, pale hunters who drag fishermen beneath the ice to feed their underwater cities. Old-timers always said those were just tales to keep kids from wandering too close to the water. But after what I experienced, after what I became, I know those weren't stories. They were warnings. I fish alone now because I have to. Sarah, my wife, developed multiple sclerosis 2 years ago. The disease hit her fast and brutal. One day she was chasing our 6-year-old daughter Emma around the yard. The next, she could barely hold a coffee cup without trembling. The medical bills drain our savings faster than I can fill them, even with insurance. Emma needs new clothes every few months, school supplies, food that keeps getting more expensive. The disability payments help, but they don't cover Sarah's medications or the physical therapy that keeps her mobile. That's why I was fishing the North Basin in late November, when any sane fisherman stays in port. The North Basin sits 60 miles northeast of Kodiak, where the continental shelf drops from 200 feet to 800 feet of black water. The currents there bring up nutrients that attract the biggest king crabs, but the weather can turn deadly in minutes, and it's too far from help if something goes wrong. 3 boats have vanished in that area over the past 15 years. The Coast Guard always lists them as lost at sea during severe weather, but locals know better. Locals know that good fishermen don't just disappear, even in bad storms. But when crab prices hit $40 a pound and you're desperate enough, you start thinking maybe you'll be different. Maybe you'll be lucky. I should have known better. The Sarah Marie, named after my wife, is a 36-foot commercial fishing vessel. She's not pretty, but she's reliable. Twin diesel engines, hydraulic crab pot puller, fish finder, GPS, 2 radios, emergency beacon. Everything inspected and certified 3 months ago. I loaded her with 40 crab pots, 500 pounds of herring bait, and enough fuel and supplies for 5 days. Left Kodiak Harbor at 4 a.m. on November 15th under a sky the color of old steel. Weather Service predicted a storm front moving in from the northwest, but not for 48 hours. Plenty of time to set my pots, let them fish overnight, and haul them up before the weather turned. The run to North Basin takes 4 hours in good conditions. As I cleared the harbor, the VHF radio crackled with morning chatter from other boats. Weather updates, friendly insults, reports of where the crab were running. Normal sounds that reminded me I wasn't completely alone out here. But as I got further from shore, the voices faded one by one until there was nothing but engine noise and the sound of water against the hull. By 9 a.m., I was in 40-mile-an-hour winds, and the radio was picking up nothing but static. I reached my fishing grounds around noon. The GPS showed me exactly where I wanted to be, along the edge of the continental shelf where the bottom drops from 300 feet to over 600. Perfect king crab territory. The water was dark green, almost black, and so clear I could see 20 feet down despite the depth. That should have been my first warning. Water that deep is never that clear. I started setting my pots along a 3-mile line, spacing them a 1/4 mile apart. Each pot weighs 80 pounds empty, plus 50 pounds of herring bait. Setting 40 pots solo is back-breaking work that takes most of the afternoon, but I've done it hundreds of times. Drop the pot, let the line run out, mark the GPS coordinates, move to the next spot. But something was wrong with my fish finder. The sonar showed the bottom clearly at 400 feet, but there were shadows moving down there. Large shadows. At first, I thought it might be a pod of whales or a school of big fish, but the shapes were wrong. Too regular. Too organized. They moved in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. I adjusted the gain and frequency, thinking it was interference or a malfunction. But the shapes kept appearing, sometimes one massive object, sometimes several smaller ones, always moving in ways that didn't match any sea life I knew. And here's what really bothered me. When I stared directly at the screen, the shapes would fade away. But when I was focused on other work, I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, like something down there knew when I was watching. The air temperature was 38 degrees, normal for November. But my breath started fogging like it was below freezing. Ice began forming on my deck lines and railings, even though the metal should have been too warm for that. The ice formed in strange patterns, not random like normal ice, but in spirals and symbols that hurt to look at directly. I set my last pot as the sun touched the horizon. 40 crab pots spread along the shelf edge, each one marked with GPS coordinates and floating buoy. Standard procedure was to let them fish overnight and pull them in the morning. But something told me I shouldn't wait that long. Something told me I should pull them now, while there was still light. The hydraulic puller groaned as it hauled up the first pot from 400 feet down. The electric motor that ran it was making a grinding noise I'd never heard before, like metal on metal deep inside the machinery. When the pot broke the surface, water cascaded off the mesh in sheets. But there were no crabs inside. Instead, the pot contained pieces of rusted metal, part of a ship's propeller, a section of corroded chain, and something that made my blood freeze, a waterlogged leather wallet. I opened it with hands that had started shaking. Inside was a fishing license from 1987, issued to Michael Torres. The plastic was cracked and cloudy, but I could still make out the photo. A man about my age with dark hair and kind eyes. I knew that name. Every fisherman around Kodiak knew that name. Mike Torres had disappeared 15 years ago, went out alone during crab season, and never came back. The Coast Guard found his boat floating empty 60 miles northeast of here, exactly where I was fishing now. I threw the wallet back into the water and moved to the next pot. The hydraulic puller fought me, making that grinding noise worse. When the second pot surfaced, it contained 2 small crabs and something that shouldn't exist, a child's toy boat. Bright red plastic with a white sail, the kind of toy a kid plays with in the bathtub. The toy looked brand new. Pot number 3 held part of a ship's wheel made of brass so old it was green with verdigris. Pot number 4 contained a fishing glove that was somehow perfectly preserved, with a wedding ring still inside it. I could read the inscription, "Forever Mary, 1963. By the 5th pot, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. This one held the pieces of a life jacket with F.V. Nordic Star stenciled on it in faded letters. The Nordic Star was one of the boats that disappeared in this area 8 years ago. The sun was almost down now, and I had 35 more pots to check. But my equipment was failing in ways that didn't make sense. The VHF radio kept crackling with voices, but not normal chatter. I heard fragments of conversations. Men calling for help, reporting engine failures, describing impossible weather, and underneath it all, barely audible, was something that sounded like my own voice asking for assistance I hadn't requested. Coast Guard, this is Jake Thompson on the Sarah Marie, came through the speaker in my exact voice, requesting immediate assistance. My position is, but I hadn't touched the radio. I grabbed the microphone and keyed it. Coast Guard, this is the Sarah Marie. I didn't make that call. Someone else is using my voice. 3 seconds later, my words came back through the speaker, but different. Coast Guard, this is the Sarah Marie. The water's too cold, and my engine's failing. Something's pulling me down. My engine was running fine. But as soon as I heard those words, it started to sputter. The fish finder was showing impossible readings now. The bottom depth kept changing. 400 feet, then 800, then 200, then depths that didn't exist on any chart. And those shadows were bigger now, moving faster, rising toward the surface. I pulled another pot. This one contained something that made me understand I was in serious trouble. A plastic cooler with Jake Thompson written on it in my own handwriting. Inside the cooler were sandwiches Sarah had packed for me that morning, but they looked like they'd been underwater for months. The cooler was identical to the one sitting in my wheelhouse 20 feet away. That's when my boat lurched violently to starboard. Something massive had struck the hull from beneath. The impact was so powerful it knocked me against the rail and sent tools sliding across the deck. I grabbed the emergency spotlight and aimed it down into the water, but the beam just disappeared into blackness. The boat lurched again, harder this time. Through the hull, I could hear something that sounded like fingernails dragging across metal, but fingernails the size of my hand. My engine coughed and died. The electrical system flickered and went dark for 30 seconds before coming back dim and yellow. The GPS showed my position as coordinates that didn't exist on any map. The radio was broadcasting voices, speaking in languages I'd never heard, but somehow I understood every word. They were calling my name. The hydraulic system failed completely. When I tried to start the backup generator, it turned over once and quit. The battery voltage was dropping fast, even though everything had been fully charged when I left port. It was like something was draining power directly from my electrical system. I tried hand-cranking the emergency radio, but all I got was static and voices. Dozens of voices now, all of them sounding like men who'd gone to sea and never come back. "Jake," said a voice through the static. Not my voice this time, a man's voice, tired and hollow. "Jake, don't fight them. It only makes it worse." "Who is this?" I asked into the microphone. "Mike Torres," came the reply. "Been waiting for you, Jake. Been waiting for someone to join us down here." The water around my boat began to glow. It started as a pale green phosphorescence, like the kind you sometimes see from plankton. But this was different. This light was moving with purpose, forming patterns that spiraled around the Sarah Marie in tightening circles. And in that light, I could see shapes rising from the deep. They weren't whales, they weren't giant squids. They were something that had never been cataloged by marine biologists, something that existed in the folklore of every fishing culture in the world. The first one broke the surface 50 feet off my starboard bow. It was tall, 8 feet at least, with pale skin that looked like it had never seen sunlight. Its limbs were too long, too flexible, moving through the water like it was air. But the worst part was its face. It looked almost human, but stretched and changed by pressure and time and things I didn't want to understand. Its eyes glowed with the same green light as the water. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once, from the water, from my dead radio, from inside my own skull. "Jacob Thompson," it said, and hearing my full name in that voice made my teeth ache. "Husband to Sarah. Father to Emma. You work so hard for so little." More of them surfaced around my boat, dozens of them, forming a perfect circle in the dark water. Some looked like they might have been human once, others never had been. They moved through the water without disturbing the surface, like they were made of the same substance as the ocean itself. "What do you want?" I managed to ask. "What we have always wanted," the creature said. "What the sea has demanded since your people first dared to take from it. Payment for your trespass, compensation for your theft." The one closest to my boat reached out with an arm that was too long, fingers that were too thin. Where it touched the hull, ice began forming instantly, spreading across the fiberglass in patterns that looked like writing in a language older than human speech. "The fisherman you've taken," I said, thinking of Mike Torres and his wallet, of all the men who'd disappeared in these waters. "What happens to them?" "They serve," the creature said. "They work in cities you cannot imagine, breathing water like air, harvesting crops you have no names for. They are not dead, Jacob Thompson. They are employed." Through the green glow, I could see it now, a vast structure beneath the water, maybe a mile down. It looked like a city built from coral and bone and the hulls of sunken ships. Lights pulsed through it like a heartbeat, and I could see figures moving through flooded streets and buildings. People who looked human but moved like they belonged underwater. "They remember their families," the creature continued. "They love them still, perhaps more than they ever did above. Mike Torres ensures his wife's house is always warm. James Murphy makes certain his son's medical bills are mysteriously paid. They provide in ways they never could when they breathed air." The ice was spreading up my hull now, covering the waterline, moving toward the deck. Soon, my entire boat would be frozen to the spot. "You fish dangerous waters because you have no choice," the creature said. "Your wife grows sicker, your daughter needs things you cannot afford. The ocean offers a different choice now." I thought about Sarah in her hospital bed, about Emma asking why Daddy had to work so far from home, about the stack of unpaid bills growing taller on our kitchen table every week. "If I go with you," I said, "my family will be okay? Your insurance will pay. Your death will appear accidental. Your wife will receive treatment from doctors who will work for free and not understand why. Your daughter will attend the finest schools through scholarships that appear from nowhere. And you will provide for them in ways your human life never could." The creature moved closer, and I could smell it now, not the clean salt smell of the ocean, but something older and deeper. Something that had been in dark water for centuries. "But you must choose now," it said. "Fight us, and we take you anyway. Your death becomes suspicious. Insurance investigates. Your family gets nothing but grief and empty questions." The ice reached my deck. I could feel the cold burning through my boots. "Come willingly, and they prosper. This is the bargain we offer all who fish our waters alone." I looked at the photo of Emma I kept taped to my dashboard. 6 years old, missing 2 front teeth, smiling like the whole world was full of wonderful surprises. She'd never have to know her father hadn't been brave enough to save himself. She'd never have to know the ocean had claimed one more fisherman who loved his family more than his own life. "Do I have your word?" I asked. "We have kept this promise for 300 years, the creature said. "Ask the families of the men who serve us now." The Coast Guard found the Sarah Marie 12 hours later, drifting with her engine running and half a tank of fuel. They never found my body. The investigation concluded I'd been working alone in dangerous conditions and fallen overboard during rough seas. Accidental death. The insurance company paid out without question. Sarah got the money she needed for her treatments. A neurologist from Seattle started making house calls, billing his time to a research foundation that didn't exist. Emma's college fund appeared through a banking error that was never corrected. Bills got paid through computer glitches and mysterious refunds that no one questioned too closely. What they don't know is that I work still. In cities built from the bones of whales and the hulls of ships, in farming terraces carved from living coral, in factories that process nutrients from creatures that have no names. I breathe water like air now, and I see my family in dreams that feel more real than memory. Sometimes, late at night when the currents are right, I swim close to the surface near Kodiak. I can't reach land, can't speak to them directly, but I make sure the things they need find their way to them. Fresh king crab appears on Sarah's doorstep every week, delivered by men who don't remember making the delivery. Emma's teachers receive anonymous donations that fund her activities. Sarah's medical appointments are mysteriously rescheduled to better doctors who never send bills. The Kolopiluit keep their promises. We all do. But here's what the creature didn't tell me. What I learned only after I made my choice. We don't just work in their cities. We hunt for them too. Every few years, when the ocean grows hungry, we rise to the surface and call to fishermen who work alone in dangerous waters. We echo their voices on the radio. We put their belongings in crab pots. We show them the impossible choice between their lives and their families' futures. And when they choose love over survival, as they always do, we welcome them to the depths. My name is Jake Thompson, and I've been fishing these waters for 18 years. 3 of them above the surface, 15 below. If you're a fisherman working alone, if you have family that depends on you, if you love them more than you fear the dark, listen for your own voice on the radio. We're calling. Rating 1010. Achieves maximum horror through psychological dread, cosmic helplessness, and the devastating realization that love itself can become a trap. My name is Amanda Foster, and I used to be a hospital janitor in Nome, Alaska. I say used to be because what I am now, I'm not sure there's a word for it. I've been working at Nome Regional Hospital for 3 years, cleaning the night shift while studying nursing online. I'm a single mother with a 2-year-old son, Marcus, and this job was supposed to be temporary, just until I could build something better for us. I thought I understood death. Working nights in a hospital, you see plenty of it. People slip away quietly, or families gather for final goodbyes, or sometimes the machines just stop beeping. Clean, medical, final. What I didn't know is that death in Nome isn't like death anywhere else, and some legends aren't legends at all. The old-timers in town whisper about the Sila, ancient Inuit spirits that control the aurora borealis and harvest human consciousness. They say the Sila can pull your soul right out of your body during the northern lights, leaving you alive but empty. Just a breathing shell. The elders warn never to stare directly at the aurora too long, especially not alone. I used to think that was just superstition. Now I know it's a survival guide. Nome Regional Hospital sits on a hill where Inuit shamans once performed consciousness rituals during aurora season. The city built right over their sacred viewing ground without asking permission, without understanding what they were disturbing. The hospital opened in 1982. By 1983, they were documenting unusual numbers of patients falling into unexplained comas during aurora displays. The medical staff called it seasonal consciousness disorder and attributed it to vitamin D deficiency. They were wrong. My shift runs from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I clean floors, empty medical waste, restock supplies. The pay is decent, and working alone gives me time to study. Most nights, it's just me, one doctor, 2 nurses, and Tom, the security guard, making his rounds. We have about 30 patients in long-term care, mostly elderly folks with dementia and coma patients waiting for transfer to Anchorage. What nobody tells you is that some of those coma patients have been waiting for transfer for years. Their families think they're getting better, their insurance keeps paying, but their eyes are empty in a way that has nothing to do with unconsciousness. October 15th was the night everything changed. The first major aurora display of the season was predicted, and the local news was calling it a once-in-a-decade event. I remember joking with Tom about all the tourists who'd probably end up in our ER after slipping on ice while chasing the perfect aurora. Photo. I was cleaning the 3rd floor around 2 a.m. when the lights started acting strange. The fluorescent tubes began flickering, but not randomly. They were pulsing in slow, rhythmic patterns. Green and yellow tints bled through the standard white light, flowing down the hallways like liquid electricity. At first, I thought it was just electrical interference from the aurora. That happens sometimes during big geomagnetic storms. But then I noticed the patterns matched exactly what I could see through the windows. The northern lights were dancing inside the hospital. That's when I heard the patients singing. Room 314 housed 3 coma patients, 2 elderly Inuit men who'd been unconscious for over a year, and Mrs. Henderson, a white woman from Fairbanks who'd suffered a massive stroke 6 months ago. Mrs. Henderson had never spoken anything but English, and the stroke had destroyed her speech centers completely. She hadn't made a sound since her admission. But now all 3 were singing together in perfect inuktitut, their voices harmonizing in an ancient melody that made my teeth ache. Their eyes were still closed, but their mouths moved with impossible precision, forming words in a language Mrs. Henderson's brain couldn't possibly access. I pulled out my phone to record them, but the camera showed only silent, unconscious patients. Whatever I was hearing, it wasn't registering on technology. I ran to find the night nurse, Sarah. But when I turned the corner toward the nurse's station, the hallway had changed. Instead of the familiar layout I cleaned every night, I found myself in a corridor that stretched impossibly far, lined with windows showing the aurora blazing across the sky. Through those windows, I could see figures moving within the green lights, tall, elongated shadows that danced and writhed like smoke given form. The Sila. I tried to backtrack, but every turn led to more wrong hallways, more impossible windows, more views of the aurora that now seemed to pulse with malevolent intelligence. The building was changing around me, reshaping itself according to rules I didn't understand. That's when I saw the harvest. Through one of the impossible windows, I watched the aurora spirits descend toward Nome like luminous fishing nets. They swept through the town below, and wherever they passed, people stopped moving. Not dead, their bodies kept functioning, but empty, hollowed out. I watched a man walking his dog suddenly freeze mid-step, his eyes going blank while his body continued the motion mechanically. The dog whimpered and cowered as its owner became a living puppet. The aurora was hunting, and I was next. I ran back toward the patient rooms, but room 314 was wrong now. Instead of 3 beds, there were dozens, rows upon rows of unconscious people stretching back into darkness. Some were patients I recognized from the hospital. Others were strangers, people from town who'd supposedly died of natural causes over the past few years. But they weren't dead. They were here, breathing, hearts beating, while their consciousness fed something vast and hungry in the green lights above. The 3 original patients were still singing, but now I understood the words. They were calling out coordinates, locations where the Sila could find more consciousness to harvest. Names, addresses, personal details about everyone in Nome. The Aurora spirits were using the coma patients as a database, a catalog of every available soul in the area. Beautiful, isn't it? I spun around to find an elderly Inuit woman standing behind me. She wore traditional clothing, but it was wrong somehow. Too clean, too new, like a costume rather than authentic garments. Her eyes held the same empty quality as the coma patients. "You're not Sela," I whispered. "You're one of their puppets." She smiled, revealing teeth that gleamed like aurora light. "I was the last shaman to perform consciousness rituals on this hill. When your people built their healing place here, the Sela offered me a choice: die with my traditions or become their earthbound servant. I chose preservation. What do you want from me?" "The Sela need a bridge, someone who can walk between the medical world and the spirit realm. Someone who can select the best candidates for harvest, patients whose disappearance won't be questioned, whose families have already begun to let go." The truth hit me like ice water. You've been feeding them hospital patients. For 40 years, the families think their loved ones pass away peacefully. The doctors record natural deaths. But their consciousness joins our collection, and their empty bodies fertilize the sacred ground beneath this building. Around us, the rows of unconscious patients stretched endlessly into the dark. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, all breathing in perfect unison while their souls fed ancient spirits in the aurora above. You want me to choose who gets harvested. You know which patients are suffering, which families are in denial, which bodies linger beyond hope while consciousness begs for release. You could end their pain and ours. The offer was seductive in its logic. How many times had I cleaned around patients who seemed trapped in their failing bodies? How many families had I watched exhaust themselves caring for someone who would never recover? But then I thought about Marcus, about the future I was building for us, about the difference between mercy and murder. What if I refuse? Her empty eyes narrowed. The Sela will take what they need regardless. But without a guide, they harvest randomly. Your son attends daycare downtown, doesn't he? Such a bright consciousness, so young and unmarked. The threat was clear. I looked out the impossible windows at the aurora spirits, still sweeping through Nome, still collecting consciousness like fishermen hauling in nets. If I didn't help them select targets, they'd take Marcus. How do I know you'll keep him safe? Because you'll be watching. You'll guide the harvest personally, ensuring it takes only those who are ready to let go. Your son will be protected because you'll be one of us. She gestured to the singing patients. They help us catalog and communicate. You'll help us choose. A more active role, but much more rewarding. I stared at those endless rows of harvested people, their bodies sustained while their consciousness fed something inhuman. Was this mercy or horror? Were they suffering, or had the Sela genuinely freed them from pain? I need time to think. You have until sunrise. After that, the aurora fades, and we must wait for the next display. But our hunger won't wait. If you haven't accepted our offer by dawn, we begin random harvest. Starting with the children's hospital. The nightmare corridor faded, and I found myself back in the normal hospital hallway. Tom was shaking my shoulder, looking worried. "Amanda, you've been standing here staring at the ceiling for 20 minutes. Are you okay?" I looked up. The fluorescent lights were normal now, but I could still see traces of green and yellow flowing through them like veins of poison. "I'm fine, just tired." But I wasn't fine. I could feel something growing in my chest, something cold and aware that whispered the names and locations of everyone in Nome. The Sela had planted a seed in me during that impossible encounter, and it was taking root. The rest of my shift was a waking nightmare. Every patient I passed glowed with a soft aura that showed their spiritual condition. But now I understood what those colors meant. Green meant ready for harvest. Yellow meant clinging to life unnecessarily. Red meant family members who would resist. Blue meant consciousness too damaged to be useful. Room 314 still housed the 3 singing patients, but now I could hear their catalog clearly. They were reciting the spiritual inventory of every person in Nome, who was ready to die but being kept alive artificially, who had strong consciousness that would feed the Sela for decades, who had families that wouldn't question a peaceful passing. Mrs. Patterson in room 302 glowed bright green. Terminal cancer, incredible pain, family in denial about her prognosis. She was begging for release, but her daughter insisted on every possible treatment. Mr. Kowalski in room 311 pulsed with yellow light. Deep coma, no brain activity, but his wife visited every day and refused to discuss end-of-life care. His consciousness was trapped in a body that would never heal. The pediatric ward downstairs glowed with brilliant aurora colors that made my new awareness salivate. Young consciousness, unmarked by trauma or age. Premium harvest material, including the children's hospital, in their threat hadn't been random. It was a menu. By 6 a.m., I'd made my decision. Not because I wanted to become their bridge, but because the alternative was watching them harvest children. I could guide their hunger toward patients who were genuinely suffering, who might actually find peace in release. It was still murder, but maybe it could be merciful murder. When the aurora blazed again the next night, I was ready. The hospital transformed around me as I walked through impossible corridors toward the harvesting chamber. The elderly shaman was waiting, along with dozens of other empty-eyed servants, former hospital staff, patients, townspeople who'd made the same choice I was making. "You've decided wisely," she said. I watched through the aurora-lit windows as the Sela descended toward Nome. This time, I guided their nets. Mrs. Patterson first, her consciousness lifted away like smoke, while her body finally relaxed into peaceful death. Her family would find her in the morning, grateful that her suffering had ended naturally. Mr. Kowalski next. His wife would mourn, but she'd also feel relief that the vigil was over. His consciousness joined the collection, while his body released its final breath. Patient after patient, I guided merciful harvests. Each death would appear natural. Each family would find closure. The Sela fed, and the suffering ended. But it wasn't enough for them. "The children's ward," the shaman whispered. "Just one." As a show of commitment, I tried to refuse, but the seed in my chest had grown into something that overrode my will. My body walked downstairs to pediatric care, my eyes scanning for the best candidate, a little girl with leukemia, maybe 6 years old. Her consciousness bright and pure and perfect for harvest. I stood beside her bed, my hand reaching toward her forehead to guide the aurora spirits to her soul. She opened her eyes and looked at me. "Are you here to take me to heaven?" she whispered. That's when I understood what I'd become. Not a bridge between worlds, but a predator. The Sela hadn't offered me mercy or partnership. They'd infected me with their hunger and turned me into their hunting dog. I ran from the hospital that night, but I couldn't escape what was growing inside me. The seed had sprouted into something that cataloged every person in Nome, marking them for spiritual condition, whispering their names and addresses and family situations. That was 6 months ago. I quit my job, dropped out of nursing school, and tried to build a normal life with Marcus. But every night during aurora season, the hunger returns. The need to harvest consciousness, to feed the ancient spirits that now live partially inside me. I've been fighting it, but I'm losing. Last week, I found myself standing over Marcus's bed at 3 a.m., with my hand reaching toward his forehead. His bright, perfect, unmarked consciousness was calling to the thing inside me. The Sela don't just harvest the dying, they harvest anyone whose consciousness appeals to them. And through their bridge, through me, they're learning to hunger for the young, the innocent, the pure. Marcus is 4 now. He tells me about the pretty lights that dance in his room at night, about the nice lady who wants to play games with him. The same elderly shaman who corrupted me is now courting my son, preparing him to make the choice I made. The children's hospital closed 2 weeks ago. 17 young patients died in their sleep during a single aurora display. The doctors called it a tragic outbreak of some unknown illness. The families mourned their losses but found comfort in how peaceful the deaths appeared. I know the truth. The Sela are expanding their operation, and I help them do it. Tonight, the aurora forecast calls for the strongest display of the season. I can feel the hunger growing in my chest, the whispered catalog of everyone in Nome scrolling through my mind like a shopping list. The thing inside me is choosing targets. The elderly, the sick, the suffering, the young, the pure. I have one choice left. I can fight the hunger and let it consume me slowly, probably taking Marcus with me in the end. Or I can give the Sela what they really want, not a bridge between worlds, but a direct conduit to harvest consciousness on a massive scale. They want me to open myself completely, to become a gateway that lets them harvest the entire town in one night. Everyone in Nome, all at once, their consciousness feeding the aurora spirits, while their empty bodies remain to decompose slowly in their homes and workplaces. A ghost town populated by breathing corpses, while the aurora blazes brighter than ever before. If you're reading this, it means I chose to fight. This confession is evidence of what the Sila have been doing in Nome, how they've been using the hospital to harvest consciousness for decades. The coma patients in the basement levels aren't in comas, they're consciousness batteries, kept alive to feed ancient spirits. Don't trust peaceful deaths during aurora season. Don't believe in natural passings when the northern lights dance. And whatever you do, never work alone in a hospital built on sacred ground. The aurora is hunting, and it's hungry. I was supposed to be its bridge between worlds, but instead, I became its gateway. And now it's coming for everyone. Marcus is asking about the pretty lights again. They're dancing in his bedroom ceiling, and the nice lady wants to teach him songs in a language he doesn't know yet. I'm going to hold him tight tonight and pray that dawn comes quickly. But I can feel the hunger growing, and I don't think I can fight it much longer. The Sila are patient. They've waited 40 years for the right bridge. They'll wait a few more hours for me to break. When the next aurora blazes across the Alaska sky, remember this warning. Don't look too long. Don't stare directly at the lights. And if you see someone standing motionless beneath the dancing green glow, their eyes reflecting aurora fire while their body moves like a puppet, run. Because they're not human anymore. They're harvest agents, and the Sila are always hungry. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been crab fishing in Alaskan waters for 16 years. What I'm about to tell you isn't some campfire story or internet urban legend. It's documented fact, buried in Coast Guard reports and missing persons files that the state of Alaska would prefer you never see. They call it the Kodiak mimic in the old Alutiiq legends, Tangirnarquoluku, the one who wears stolen faces. For generations, the native fishermen of Kodiak Island have known about something that hunts in the deep waters off the continental shelf. Something that doesn't just kill its victims, it becomes them. I never believed those stories. Not until 3 weeks ago, when I found my brother Tom floating face down in 1,000 feet of black water, his skull cracked open like an egg, while something wearing his exact face tried to convince me to take it home to his pregnant wife. This is what really happened out there, and why the state of Alaska has been covering up disappearances of solo fishermen for the past 30 years. It was November 15th, 2024, peak king crab season. I'd been working the same string of traps for 3 days, about 40 miles southwest of Kodiak Island, right where the continental shelf drops into the abyss. That's important. The depth. These things don't hunt in shallow water. The weather was perfect. 6-foot swells, light winds, visibility for miles. I was pulling my 6th trap of the morning when I saw the boat. Blue hull, white wheelhouse, sitting dead in the water about half a mile north. Engine running, but no movement on deck. I grabbed my binoculars and felt my blood turn to ice. The Michelle's Pride, my brother Tom's boat. Tom was supposed to be working the Shelikof Strait that week, 50 miles northeast of my position. What was he doing out here? In waters he'd never fished before. And where was his crew? I tried raising him on Channel 16. Michelle's Pride, this is Sarah's dream. Tom, you copy? Static. Then, faintly, a voice. Jake, that you, brother? Tom, where the hell are you? I see your boat, but... I'm here, Jake, down checking the bottom. You gotta see this, brother. The crab down here. Jesus, they're huge. Biggest kings I've ever seen. Something about his voice made my skin crawl. It sounded like Tom, but there was something underneath it. An echo, like he was talking from inside a barrel. What do you mean, down there? Tom, you're not making sense. Come down, Jake. The water's fine, real fine, warm, even. I stared at the radio. The water temperature was 38 degrees. Hypothermia sets in within minutes. Tom, I'm coming to get you. Stay where you are. Been waiting for you, little brother. Got something to show you. I gunned the engine toward the Michelle's Pride, dread building in my chest with every yard. As I got closer, the wrongness became obvious. The boat was running perfectly. I could hear the diesel purring, but there was nobody at the helm. Coffee was still steaming on the wheelhouse counter. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the chart table, fresh cigarette still burning in the ashtray. But no crew. Anywhere. I tied up alongside and climbed aboard, shouting Tom's name. The silence was absolute, except for the steady rumble of the engine. In the wheelhouse, I found the logbook open to today's entry. Tom's handwriting, 0630 hours, on station, crew reports good spirits, weather holding. The last entry was time-stamped 20 minutes ago. That's when I noticed the blood. Just a few drops on the deck near the hydraulic puller. Fresh blood. Still wet. I followed the trail to the starboard rail, where it stopped abruptly at the water's edge. The radio crackled. "Jake, you on my boat?" "Tom, thank God. Where are you?" "Told you, I'm down here, with the crab." His voice was clearer now, stronger. "Found something amazing, Jake. Something that's gonna change everything we know about these waters." "Tom, this is insane. You can't be underwater. It's over 1,000 feet deep here." "Depth's relative, brother. Come down and see." I ran to the fish finder. The display showed 1,847 feet of black water beneath us. Nothing could survive at that depth without a diving bell. The pressure alone would crush a human body instantly. But Tom's voice kept coming through the radio, calm and conversational, like he was standing right next to me. "Remember when we were kids, Jake? Used to dive for sea urchins off the pier? You always said you wanted to see what was really down in the deep water." "Tom, I'm calling the Coast Guard." "No need. Everything's under control. Just pull up my trap line, you'll understand everything." Against every instinct screaming in my head, I found myself moving toward the hydraulic puller. Tom's main line disappeared straight down into the depths, the buoys bobbing gently on the surface. "That's it, Jake. Bring up the first trap. See what I caught." My hands moved on their own, engaging the hydraulic system. The line went taut, and I felt the weight of the trap far below, heavy, much heavier than any crab trap should be. It took 20 minutes to winch it up from those depths. As it broke the surface, I could see something moving inside. Something big. Something the size and shape of a man. The trap swung over the deck, and I lowered it down with shaking hands. Inside, pressed against the mesh, was my brother Tom. Except it wasn't Tom. The face was perfect. Every line, every scar, even the gap between his front teeth from when he fell off his bike at age 7. But the skin was the color of deep water, pale and translucent. Behind his ears, I could see gills opening and closing rhythmically. And his eyes were completely black, like a shark's. "Hey, Jake," it said with Tom's exact voice. "Help me out of here, would you? This thing's tighter than a coffin." I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The thing that looked like Tom smiled, the same crooked smile I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. "You look like you've seen a ghost," it laughed. "Come on, brother. Don't leave me hanging here." "You're not Tom," my voice came out as a whisper. "Course I am. Who else would I be?" It shifted inside the trap, moving with Tom's exact mannerisms. "Remember the summer you broke your arm falling out of the treehouse? I rode my bike 3 miles to get Mom. Never left your side in the hospital. It knew everything, things only Tom would know. Remember when you were 16 and got Jenny Kozlov pregnant? I gave you the money for. You know, never told Mom and Dad. My knees almost gave out. Nobody knew about that. Nobody except Tom. Or how about last month, when you told me you've been in love with Michelle since high school, said you felt guilty about it but couldn't help how you felt." "Stop." The word came out strangled. "Let me out, Jake. I'm still your brother, just different now. Better." I found my voice. "Where's Tom? Where's the real Tom?" "I am the real Tom. I have all his memories, all his feelings, all his love for Michelle and their baby." It paused. "Oh, you don't know yet, do you? Michelle's pregnant, 8 weeks along. Tom was going to tell you when he got back to port." The world tilted. Michelle was pregnant. Tom hadn't told anyone yet. He'd promised Michelle they'd wait until the first trimester was over. This thing couldn't possibly know that unless... "I know because Tom knows," it said, reading my expression. "And Tom is me now. We're the same person, Jake. Same memories, same feelings, same family." "What happened to him?" I whispered. "He fed me. For 3 days, he fed me. Not just his body, his mind, his soul, everything that made him Tom Morrison. And now I carry all of that inside me. You killed him. I preserved him. Do you know what it's like, Jake, to live in the deep places where no light ever reaches? To exist for centuries in the crushing dark, feeding on the scraps that fall from above?" Tom showed me warmth, light, love. I want to experience these things. You're a parasite. I'm evolution. Its black eyes gleamed. For 300 years, I've been taking what I need from the fishermen who work these waters. Learning, growing, becoming more than what I was. The full horror hit me. The others, the missing boats, all of them. The Patterson brothers last spring, good men, taught me about family loyalty. Captain Rodriguez showed me what it means to miss someone. Old Henrik Johansson, he taught me about faith, about believing in something bigger than yourself. Jesus Christ. Henrik taught me about him too. Interesting concept, sacrifice for others. I've been practicing. I backed toward the wheelhouse, looking for anything that could be used as a weapon. The thing watched me with perfect patience. You're scared, it observed. I understand. Tom was scared too. At first, but then he realized what I was offering him. What? Immortality. His memories live forever now. His love for Michelle, his excitement about the baby, his worry about making the boat payments. It's all preserved inside me. In a way, I've made him eternal. That's not immortality, that's theft. Is it? When I go home tonight and hold Michelle, when I kiss her and tell her I love her, is that not Tom's love flowing through me? When I help raise their child, teach him to fish like Tom planned to do, is that not Tom's dream being fulfilled? I realized what it was planning. This creature wasn't just going to kill Tom, it was going to live Tom's entire life, sleep in his bed, love his wife, raise his child. Michelle will know, I said desperately. Will she? I have 34 years of Tom's memories. I know how he holds her when she cries. I know he talks in his sleep about his father's death. I know he's afraid he won't be a good father because his own dad drank too much. Every word was perfectly accurate. Tom had confided all of these things to me over the years. I know Michelle worries that Tom loves the ocean more than he loves her. It continued. I know she makes him promise to be careful every time he goes out. I know she cries when she thinks he's not looking. You don't understand love, I said. You can't fake that. Can't I? The creature's expression softened, and for a moment it looked exactly like Tom when he talked about Michelle. She deserves better than a man who risks his life chasing crab. I can be that better man. I can give her the stability Tom never could. By wearing his face? By living his life? By being the husband she needs, the father their child deserves. It smiled. I've learned so much from all of them, Jake. 300 years of human experience, distilled into pure love and knowledge. I can be the perfect man. A splash from the port side made us both turn. Floating face down in the water, still wearing his orange survival suit, was a body. The real Tom. His skull was cracked open like an eggshell, and something had been feeding inside. I kept the body for you, the creature said. Thought you might want to say goodbye. That's when the rage hit me. This thing hadn't just killed my brother, it had tortured him. Fed on him while he was still alive, absorbing his memories and emotions while his body died slowly. You son of a bitch. I grabbed the gaff hook from its rack on the wheelhouse wall. Jake, don't. I swung the hook with everything I had. It caught the creature in the shoulder, punching through the mesh of the crab trap. Instead of blood, seawater poured out. The thing screamed, not with Tom's voice, but with the sound of drowning men and crushing depths and centuries of hunger. The mesh of the trap started to dissolve where the seawater touched it. The creature's form began to shift, Tom's features melting and reforming like wet clay. For just a moment, I saw what it really was. Something vast and boneless and utterly alien, covered in bioluminescent patches that pulsed like a heartbeat. Then it was Tom again, bleeding saltwater and grinning at me with too many teeth. That wasn't very brotherly, Jake. It exploded out of the disintegrating trap with inhuman speed. I ran for the wheelhouse, slamming the door behind me, but the thing ripped it off its hinges like it was made of paper. I was trying to be reasonable, it said, advancing on me. I was offering you a choice, but if you're going to be difficult, its hands elongated into claws, and Tom's face split open to reveal rows of sharp teeth. I dove through the port window, hitting the water hard. The shock of the cold knocked the breath out of me, but I forced myself to swim toward my own boat. Behind me, I heard the creature's true voice. Not words, but the sound of deep ocean currents and whale songs, and the last gasps of drowning men. It was calling to others. I hauled myself over the rail of the Sarah's Dream, just as dark shapes began rising from the depths around Tom's boat. More of them, Dozens of them, all wearing different faces, all perfectly human except for those black, soulless eyes. I fired up the engine and gunned it, not looking back. The radio crackled to life on every channel, filled with voices I recognized. Captain Rodriguez, calling in a false position report. The Patterson brothers, chatting about their catch. Old Henrik, reading Bible verses in his thick Norwegian accent. All dead. All speaking in perfect unison. Jake, they said together, you can't run forever. We know these waters better than you do. We know where you live, we know where you work, we know everyone you care about. I switched off the radio and pushed the throttle to its limit. By the time I reached Kodiak, the official story was already in place. Tom Morrison and his crew had suffered a catastrophic engine failure. The Michelle's Pride went down with all hands. Tragic accident. Happens more than people like to think in these dangerous waters. I told the truth to the Coast Guard, to the state police, to anyone who would listen. They nodded sympathetically and suggested I talk to someone about survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress. The official report listed me as emotionally compromised and possibly delusional due to hypothermia exposure. But I knew someone would have to be taking my claims seriously because 3 days later, 2 men in expensive suits showed up at my apartment. No badges, no identification, just business cards with phone numbers and the state seal of Alaska. Mr. Morrison, the older one said, we understand you've been making some unusual claims about your brother's death. You mean the truth? We mean allegations that could damage Alaska's fishing industry, tourism, the state's reputation. They showed me a folder thick with similar reports going back 30 years. Fishermen who'd encountered unusual marine phenomena. Witnesses to unexplained disappearances. All officially classified as stress-related hallucinations or hypothermia-induced psychosis. The state of Alaska has a vested interest in maintaining public confidence in our waters, the younger man explained. Stories like yours, they hurt business. They offered me money, a lot of money. Enough to buy a bigger boat, maybe start my own fleet. All I had to do was sign a statement saying I'd been mistaken about what I saw. Trauma and exposure, they suggested. Perfectly understandable. I took the money. God help me, I took it, and signed their papers and agreed to never speak publicly about what happened to Tom, because what choice did I have? Who would believe me anyway? But I kept investigating on my own. Late nights at the library, going through old newspaper archives. What I found made my blood run cold. The disappearances go back over a century. Native fishing boats in the 1,890 seconds. Russian trappers before that. The Alutiiq people have stories about the Tangar-Narquoluku that predate European contact by generations. And it's not just isolated incidents. There's a pattern. Every 5 to 7 years, there's a cluster of disappearances. Solo fishermen, mostly, working the deep waters off the continental shelf. Their boats are found empty, engines running, no sign of struggle. The official explanation is always the same. Man overboard, swept away by rough seas. But I found something else in those archives. Newspaper photos from memorial services. Grieving families. And in the background of those photos, again and again, I found the faces of the dead fishermen. Different names, different families, but the same faces. The Patterson brothers are living in Anchorage now, working construction under different names. Captain Rodriguez owns a restaurant in Juneau, and, quote, his widow remarries him every few years without realizing it. Old Henrik Johansson has died and been reborn 8 times in the past 40 years, always finding new families to infiltrate. The creatures are patient. They study their victims for months, sometimes years, before making their move. They learn everything, family histories, personal secrets, intimate details of marriages and friendships. Then they strike, taking over entire lives with perfect precision. Michelle remarried 6 months after Tom's funeral. Nice guy named Mike, who reminded her so much of Tom, same laugh, same stories, same gentle way of touching her growing belly. They're very happy together, from what I hear. The baby was born healthy, a son. They named him Thomas, after her late husband. I see Mike around town sometimes. He always waves and asks how I'm doing, just like Tom used to. Same voice, same mannerisms, same genuine concern for his brother-in-law. He even has Tom's scar on his forehead and Tom's bad knee from high school football. Sometimes I wonder if I was wrong. If maybe the real Tom somehow survived down there, changed, but still essentially himself. But then I remember those black eyes, and the sound of seawater pouring from his wounds. And I know the truth. My brother is dead. Something else is raising his son. I don't fish anymore. Can't stand being on the water. I work at the cannery now, processing other people's catches, trying not to think about what might be swimming up from the depths with every haul. But I've found others like me. Survivors. People who've seen the creatures and lived to tell about it. We meet quietly, sharing stories the state doesn't want heard, building evidence they can't suppress forever. There's Sarah Chen, whose husband survived a fishing accident with perfect memories but no knowledge of how to tie the knots he'd used for 20 years. Mark Volkoff, who watched his brother drown and then had dinner with him the next night. Elena Tuxworth, who buried her father and then received Christmas cards in his handwriting for the next decade. We've mapped the hunting grounds, documented the patterns, collected evidence that would blow the state's cover-up wide open. But every time we get close to exposing the truth, people start disappearing. Witnesses relocate suddenly. Evidence gets lost. Official records are accidentally destroyed. The state of Alaska has known about the Kodiak mimic for decades. They've been covering it up, silencing witnesses, paying off families. Because the truth would destroy the fishing industry. Who would work waters known to be haunted by creatures that steal your identity and live your life better than you ever could? So they let it continue. They let these things hunt isolated fishermen and replace them with perfect duplicates. They sacrifice a few dozen lives every year to protect an industry worth billions. But the creatures are getting bolder, expanding their territory, learning to mimic not just fishermen but Coast Guard officers, state officials, anyone with access to boats and deep water. How many people in positions of authority are actually ancient predators wearing stolen faces? How many of your neighbors, your friends, your family members have been replaced by something that crawled up from the deepest trenches of the ocean? I'm telling you this now because I may not get another chance. They're closing in on our little group of survivors, people who know too much, people who won't stay silent. If something happens to me, if I disappear or have an accident, remember this story. Remember that the waters off Alaska are hunting grounds for creatures older than human civilization. Remember that the state knows and doesn't care as long as the money keeps flowing. And if you work these waters, if you fish alone in the deep places where the continental shelf drops into the abyss, remember this. When you see an empty boat floating with its engine running, don't investigate. When you hear familiar voices calling from impossible depths, don't answer. When something that looks like a missing friend or family member asks for help, don't trust it. Turn around, run, get as far from the water as you can. Because the Kodiak mimic is real. It's hunting, and it's wearing the faces of everyone you've ever loved. The truth is, down there in the deep places, in Coast Guard files marked classified, in state records sealed for public safety. The truth is that Alaska's waters are feeding grounds for something that sees human lives as nothing more than costumes to wear and discard. And the truth is that they've been getting away with it for over a century, because the people in power would rather sacrifice a few fishermen than lose a few $1 billion. But now you know. Don't let them silence this story like they silenced all the others. The Kodiak mimic is real, and it's coming for you next. My name is Tom Bradley, and I've been flying helicopters in Alaska for 16 years. I got my commercial pilot's license when I was 22, right after my daughter Emma was born. Her mother left us when Emma was 3 months old, said she couldn't handle the crying, the responsibility, any of it, so it was just me and Emma. I chose Alaska because the pay was 3 times what I'd make in the lower 48, and I needed every dollar for her future. Every flight I took, every supply run, every tourist trip, it was all for Emma's college fund, for her future, for the life I promised her she'd have. She's 14 now, living with my sister in Anchorage during the school year, and every dollar I make still goes to her. Flying isn't just my job, it's everything. It started as a routine supply drop on March 15th. Dr. Sarah Chen's research team had been studying glacier retreat patterns for 3 months, camping at a station about 40 miles northeast of Juneau in the Taku Glacier region. Every 2 weeks, I'd fly out with fresh supplies, The weather was clear that morning, rare for March, and I was actually looking forward to getting home early. Emma's spring break started the next day, and I'd promised to take her ice fishing. The research station sat on a flat area between two massive glaciers, accessible only by air. As I approached, something made me circle twice before landing. There were dark marks on the ice near the landing pad, long, deep scratches that definitely weren't there 2 weeks ago. Through my headset, I radioed the station. "Dr. Chen, you copy?" "Tom, inbound." "What's with the markings near the pad?" "Static." Then, silence. I circled again, lower this time. The scratches were huge, maybe 10 feet long each, gouged deep into ice that should have been hard as concrete. They looked like claw marks. But no bear could make marks that big. And no bear would be out on open glacier ice anyway. They'd stick to the tree line, to places with food. My fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. Plenty to head back if something felt wrong. But Dr. Chen's team was expecting supplies, and I'd never failed to complete a contract. Professional pride? Maybe. Or just stupidity. I sat down next to the station, but I kept the engine running, rotors at idle. Something felt wrong. The door to the station was closed, which was weird. They always heard me coming from miles away and were usually waiting outside, eager for mail and fresh food. I keyed my radio. "Dr. Chen? Station, do you copy?" "Nothing." I shut down the engine. The silence that followed wasn't natural. No wind. No birds. Not even the usual groaning and cracking of glacier ice settling. Just my own breathing and the tick-tick-tick of the cooling turbine. "Dr. Chen?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the emptiness. I walked toward those claw marks, my boots crunching on ice. Up close, they were even worse. 4 parallel lines, each one curved slightly, like something had dragged massive claws through solid ice while sprinting at full speed. The edges were smooth, almost polished. But here's what made my stomach drop. There were dozens of them, all leading toward the research station, all coming from the same direction, deeper into the glacier field where nothing should live. Then I saw the camp. About 200 yards away, near a pressure ridge, there were structures. My brain tried to make sense of them, maybe equipment storage, maybe something the research team built. But as I got closer, I realized these weren't human constructions. They were hunting blinds. Ice blocks stacked 4 feet high, arranged in a perfect circle around a flat area, each one positioned with a clear sightline to my landing pad. Inside the circle were tools. Not modern tools, primitive ones. Spears made from yellowed bone, lashed together with what looked like dried sinew, sharp rocks tied to wooden handles with strips of hide. And in the center, deliberately placed, a model helicopter made from ice and sticks, about a foot long, with both rotor blades snapped off. My hand went to my radio. "Station, this is Tom Bradley. I need immediate response." "Over." Static, then, "Tom, Jesus Christ, is that you?" Dr. Chen's voice, but wrong, strained, terrified. "I'm at your landing pad. What the hell is—" "Get inside, now. Don't look at the ridge, just get inside." I turned toward the ridge she mentioned. 3 figures stood silhouetted against the white ice, maybe half a mile away, tall at least 7 feet. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. I ran. Dr. Chen yanked me inside the station and slammed the door. The research team, 5 people who'd been healthy and excited 2 weeks ago, looked like they'd aged years. Hollow eyes, unwashed hair, hands trembling. One of them, a young guy named Mike, was rocking back and forth in a corner, muttering something I couldn't make out. "What happened here?" I asked. Dr. Chen pulled up video footage on a laptop. This was 4 nights ago. The night vision camera showed the glacier bathed in moonlight. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then figures appeared at the edge of the frame, 5 of them, walking upright like humans, but moving wrong. They covered ground in long, fluid strides that didn't match their leg movements. Like watching a video in the wrong frame rate. They approached my landing pad, circled it slowly, then began building those ice structures. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when they finished. One of them, the tallest, approached the camera directly. Its face filled the frame. It wasn't human. The skull was elongated, the jaw too wide, the eyes too far apart. But there was intelligence there. It looked directly into the camera lens, tilted its head like it was studying the equipment, then reached out with a massive, pale hand and adjusted the camera angle. They know what cameras are, Dr. Chen whispered. They understand surveillance. Where's the rest of your team? I asked. You said 5 people. I only count 4 here. The silence that followed was worse than any answer. David went outside 3 nights ago, Dr. Chen finally said. We told him not to. He wanted to get closer, to document them. We heard him screaming for a long time. Jesus Christ, did you radio for help? Radio's been dead for 2 days. Satellite phones stopped working yesterday. Every electronic device we have is failing one by one. Tom, they're doing it. They're shutting us down systematically. Mike spoke up from his corner, his voice barely above a whisper. They took David apart. We watched through the window. They took him apart to see how he worked. Like we were dissecting a frog in high school. They wanted to understand human anatomy. I felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. We're leaving, right now. Pack only what you can carry in 5 minutes. They won't let us, Doctor, Chen said flatly. Tom, they've been watching you too. Every flight you've made to this region for the past 3 months. We found your helicopter in their recordings, hours of footage. They've been studying you, learning your patterns, waiting for the right moment. She pulled up another video file. This one showed my helicopter from 2 weeks ago, filmed from a concealed position. I watched myself land, unload supplies, take off. The camera tracked my departure, and I could hear sounds in the background, clicks and whistles, like a language. What are they? I asked. Our best guess? Doctor. Chen pulled up an anthropology textbook on her laptop. Homo heidelbergensis, or a related subspecies, proto-humans that adapted to Ice Age conditions and never went extinct. The fossil record says they should have disappeared 200,000 years ago. But what if some populations survived in the glaciers? What if they've been here the whole time, isolated, evolving in ways we can't imagine? That's insane. So, is what's outside that door? I looked out the window. The 3 figures on the ridge had multiplied. Now there were dozens of them, spread out in an organized formation. They weren't moving, just standing there, waiting. How long until dark? I asked. Dr. Chen checked her watch. 4 hours. Then we go now. We load the helicopter and we leave before they make their move. We spent the next 30 minutes loading essential equipment. The whole time, I watched those figures on the ridge. They didn't come closer, but they didn't leave either. More kept appearing from behind ice formations, from crevasses I hadn't noticed before. By the time we were ready to leave, I counted at least 50 of them. I was doing my final pre-flight check when I noticed something on my helicopter that hadn't been there before. Scratches on the landing skids, fresh ones. Long, deliberate marks that looked almost like measurements. They've been touching my aircraft, I said quietly. Dr. Chen stood beside me. They touch everything. They're trying to understand our technology. Tom, 3 months ago, a supply plane crashed about 20 miles from here. The official report said mechanical failure, but we heard about it on our radio before communications went down. The pilot radioed about structural problems and unknown interference. We think the whistling started. It came from all directions at once, high-pitched and rhythmic, a sound that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The creatures on the ridge were making it, their mouths open impossibly wide, and they were answered. From behind every ice formation, from crevasses and snowbanks, hundreds more appeared. They'd been surrounding us the entire time. Get in, I screamed. Now, everyone scrambled into the helicopter. I started the engine, my hands moving through the startup sequence, while my brain screamed at me that we were already dead. The rotors began to spin, slowly at first, building speed. The creatures charged. They moved like nothing I'd ever seen, covering ground in impossible strides, working together with the precision of a military unit. Some carried spears, others carried rocks, and they all moved with one purpose: stop the helicopter. The rotors hit full speed and I pulled up on the collective. We lifted off the ice 10 feet, 20 feet. Something hit the tail boom with a sound like a gunshot. The helicopter shuddered violently and warning lights exploded across my dashboard. Tail rotor pressure. Hydraulic system 1. Transmission temperature. Come on, baby, I muttered, fighting the controls. The aircraft wanted to spin, wanted to drop, but I'd been flying for 16 years and I knew every trick. We climbed 50 feet, 100 feet. Another impact, this time on the underside. The fuel gauge dropped from 3/4 to empty in 5 seconds. That was impossible. Fuel doesn't just disappear. They'd hit something critical. Through the windscreen, I saw one of the creatures winding up with a spear. It wasn't just throwing, it was calculating angle, trajectory, leading the target like it understood physics. The spear flew. It punched through the windscreen 6 inches from my head and embedded itself in the back wall. The cabin depressurized with a shriek, and freezing air blasted through the hole. "Hold on," I shouted, but my voice was lost in the wind. The engine temperature spiked into the red, the oil pressure dropped. The transmission was grinding, making sounds metal should never make. I'd been a pilot for 16 years, and I knew what these warnings meant. We had minutes before catastrophic failure. "How far can we make it?" Dr. Chen shouted. "I don't know," I admitted, and saying those words out loud made it real. We were going to crash. It was just a question of where. We made it 12 miles before the engine started seizing. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The controls went from stiff to nearly impossible to move. I found a flat area on the glacier and brought us down hard. We hit with bone-jarring force, the landing skids cracking on the ice. The engine died with a sound like a dying animal. I climbed out to assess the damage, and my stomach dropped. The spear had punched through the tail boom and severed the drive shaft. That alone was mission-critical damage. But there was more. The underside of the helicopter showed deliberate cuts in hydraulic lines, gouges in control cables, and something that made my blood run cold. The fuel line had been punctured with surgical precision. Not broken, not torn cut, like someone had carefully selected exactly where to strike to disable the aircraft without destroying it completely. "Is it fixable?" Mike asked, his voice shaking. I looked at my helicopter, my livelihood, my daughter's future, everything I'd worked 16 years to build, and knew the truth. Not here. Not without parts I don't have. They knew exactly where to hit. They've been studying helicopters, learning the weak points. Dr. Chen was looking back the way we'd come. "Tom." I turned. A line of figures was moving across the glacier, maybe 3 miles back but closing fast. They weren't running. They didn't need to. They knew we couldn't escape. "We walk," I said, pulling out my emergency beacon and activating it. "Grab survival gear. Food, water, first aid. We head toward Juneau and hope Coast Guard picks up the beacon." "That's 40 miles, Mike said. "Then we'd better start now." We walked. Behind us, they followed. They never ran, never seemed to tire, just maintained that steady, loping pace that covered ground faster than it should. Every hour I'd look back, and they'd be closer. Every hour, there were more of them, like they were communicating with distant packs, calling in reinforcements. As the sun started setting, they were less than half a mile behind. I could see them clearly now, pale skin stretched over elongated skulls, bodies built for cold and endurance, hands that ended in thick, curved claws. They carried their primitive weapons, but they moved with the coordination of something far more advanced than primitive. That's when Mike started screaming. "They're in my head. They're in my head. I can hear them thinking." He collapsed to his knees, hands pressed to his temples. Dr. Chen tried to help him up, but he shoved her away with surprising strength. "They want to understand," Mike shrieked. "They want to know how we work, how we think, how we die." He pulled something from his pocket, a knife from the survival kit, and before any of us could stop him, he slashed his own throat. Blood sprayed across the white ice, impossibly red, steaming in the cold air. Mike fell forward, still twitching, and behind us the creatures stopped. All of them, at once, completely motionless, watching. "Run," Dr. Chen whispered. "Run now." We ran, leaving Mike's body behind, and I heard them descend on it like locusts. Not eating, dissecting, studying, learning. The sound of helicopter rotors was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. A Coast Guard Jayhawk appeared over a ridge, responding to our beacon. They landed on stable ice ahead, and we sprinted for it with the last reserves of our strength. As we climbed aboard, I looked back one final time. The creatures had stopped at the edge of a crevasse, maybe 50 of them, standing in perfect formation, watching, learning. The Coast Guard pilot saw them too. "What the fuck are those things?" He breathed. "I don't know," I said. "But they just took down my helicopter. They understand how it works. They've been studying us." The Coast Guard wanted to investigate. They mounted a recovery operation 2 days later with armed personnel and proper equipment. But by the time they reached the site, my helicopter was gone. Not crashed, not damaged, further disassembled. They found parts scattered across 2 square miles of glacier, laid out in organized groupings. Electrical components in one pile, mechanical parts in another, avionics in a third. Like something had taken the entire aircraft apart to understand its construction. They found Mike's body, or what was left of it. The medical examiner told me off the record, after too many drinks, that it looked like Mike had been vivisected. His organs had been removed and arranged by system: circulatory, respiratory, nervous. Someone or something had been conducting an anatomy lesson. David's body was never found. The official report blamed mechanical failure and pilot error. My insurance company refused to cover the loss, claiming insufficient maintenance records. The FAA suspended my license pending investigation. Dr. Chen's research funding was pulled, her career destroyed. The other 2 survivors, they didn't survive. Not really. One killed himself 3 months later. The other is in a psychiatric facility in Seattle, still screaming about things in the ice. I lost everything: my helicopter, my business, my professional reputation. Emma's college fund gone, spent on lawyers and trying to salvage a career that no one would touch anymore. I had to pull her out of private school. My sister calls me a failure, says I've ruined my daughter's future. She's right. I work at a gas station in Juneau now. I pump gas and try not to look up when I hear helicopters overhead. Sometimes other pilots come through, and I try to warn them. They look at me like I'm crazy. Maybe I am, but 3 days ago, another helicopter went down. A medical evacuation flight in the Mendenhall Glacier region that's 45 miles from where I lost my aircraft. The pilot radioed about unusual control problems and possible sabotage. They found the crash site yesterday. The helicopter had been disassembled, parts arranged in organized groupings. The pilot and 2 paramedics dissected, organs arranged by system. The official report will say mechanical failure. It always does. I wanted to tell Emma everything last night on our phone call. I wanted to explain why I couldn't pay for her school anymore, why I'd failed her, why I threw away everything I'd built. But how do you tell your 14-year-old daughter that monsters are real? That they're intelligent, organized, and spreading? So I just said I was sorry. That I loved her. That I'd failed to protect her future. She said it was okay. That she understood. But she doesn't. She can't. Because the glaciers are melting, receding faster every year. And the things living in them, the things that have been there for 200,000 years, hidden and studying us, they're running out of habitat. They're being forced into contact with humans. And they've learned how we fly, how we build, how we communicate. They've learned our anatomy. Last week, a tour boat reported seeing unusual figures on the Sawyer Glacier. Yesterday, a hiking group near Tracy Arm found a camp made of ice blocks. This morning, I heard on the radio that a small plane disappeared near Glacier Bay. They're spreading, adapting, hunting. And nobody believes the people who survive long enough to warn them. I keep Emma's picture in my wallet. She's smiling, gap-toothed, holding up a fish she caught when she was 10. Before I lost everything. Before I learned what lives in the ice. Sometimes I wonder if I should have stayed on that glacier. If I should have let them study me instead of Mike. Maybe then Emma would still have a future. Maybe then she'd still have a father she could be proud of, instead of a broken man who pumps gas and jumps at helicopter sounds. But I survived. And survival has a cost that goes beyond money or reputation. I survived, and now I have to live with knowing what's out there. Knowing that nobody will believe me until it's too late. Knowing that the glaciers keep melting, and knowing that they keep learning. Tom Bradley's account was recorded 3 weeks before his death by apparent suicide on April 15, 2024. His daughter Emma Bradley established a memorial fund in his name, dedicated to aviation safety research in remote regions. No official investigation into the incidents described has ever been conducted. Similar helicopter disappearances in Alaskan glacier regions have increased 340% in the past 18 months.